Welcome to Anime T23, where we dive deep into the most intriguing what-if scenarios in the anime universe. In today's episode, we explore a world where Naruto, Uzumaki, the future hero of Konoha, to protect his brother. Join us as we uncover how Naruto's become Shinobi to protect his brother transforms into his greatest strength. What if Naruto parents died and Naruto become Shinobi to protect his brother? Final part. Chapter 40. Who needs therapy with friends like these? Naruto rested his cup of warm ginger tea on his leg as he propped him up on the right side of Kakashi's hospital bed. The man was a second away from attempting to escape out the window at any given moment, so Naruto was tasked with keeping him there until he was discharged in a couple of hours. The nurses had already labeled his room as a flight risk. Shikaka had taken one look at Naruto this morning and sent him for an early lunch, so he had some time to kill. "So Ryo's finally back?" Kakashi asked, lying back into the pile of pillows Naruto had forced on him when he'd entered the room. The minute he'd awoken from the Sharingan-induced coma, he had ditched a flimsy hospital gown, and Naruto couldn't say he blamed him. His Jounin vest and black long-sleeve shirt was resting on the other chair on the left side of the bed, leaving him in his sleeveless vest with a connecting mask. His Itachi was resting on the top, so Kakashi had closed his scarred eye. He nodded as he took a sip of tea. The month he'd spent in the hospital before the invasion had given him a brief reprieve from the worst symptoms due to all the forced rest, but that was long past. He knew Shikaka had noticed that he'd pretty much stopped eating because of the nausea from all the coughing, and he'd had to hide all the blood-covered tissues from the people going in and out of his office. He was grateful that he could sit for a good chunk of the day, otherwise he might have had a few fainting spells. He knew it was a bad situation, but he didn't have time to take the rest he probably needed, and there wasn't anything anyone could do about it anyway. Yakushi-sensei was gone, and he had no desire to find anyone else. He'd just live with it. "I really don't know what I'm going to do about the teams," he continued. "Now you're awake and Ryo is back. I could reform the Genin teams, but that's not fair on Sasuke and Shikamaru. They've been performing Chunin duties for a few weeks now, and I've had nothing but glowing reports about them. It just wouldn't be fair to drop them back down to Genin level, especially Sasuke." "You have a point." Kakashi crossed his arms. "We could have 2 teams of 2 or 1 team of 4. Naruto rubbed his face tiredly. This had been swirling around his head since Ryo had come back, and he was no closer to a solution. "I know Shikamaru would go back to his team if I asked, but I can't ask Sasuke. He's been amazing on guard duty, but I think he needs more of a challenge. I can't send him further out because of Orochimaru, but I don't want to cage him here. Unless he wore a disguise or something for leaving the village." He rested his head on the back of his chair, sighing deeply. He was too tired for this. "Hey!" He opened his eyes to look back at his friend. Kakashi had one dark eye trained on him, his silver hair falling across his forehead without his headband to hold it back. "Are you okay?" Kakashi asked seriously. "You seem more tired than usual." Naruto couldn't muster the energy to pretend. It was Kakashi. He was safe with him. "I feel like I haven't stopped moving since the attack," he admitted. "There is so much to do, and with Kinzuya in the hospital, I had to make sure I was there for the kids while running the mission assignments and creating seals. I'm being pulled in so many different directions that I can barely see myself in the mirror." Kakashi. "I feel like if I stop moving for too long that I'm going to drown and take everyone down with me." He let the following silence settle around them, tipping his head back again and closing his eyes so he didn't have to see Kakashi's expression. He hadn't allowed himself to think about his mental state because he simply couldn't afford to. He didn't need Shikaku and Kinzuya telling him he was overdoing it. He knew that. He could feel it in every ache and pain and cough and wheeze. He felt like he had to present himself as pulled together to the others that knew about his illness so they wouldn't doubt him, but Kakashi didn't know. He felt a little guilty about that, but he didn't want him to look at him differently. He felt a nudge on his foot and slowly opened his eyes, staring blearily at Kakashi. He patted the bed, and Naruto raised an eyebrow. You need it more than I do, and the nurses will be too happy to see me still here to tell you off." Naruto sighed but heaved himself up, handing his cup of tea to Kakashi to hold as he climbed in next to his friend. Once settled, with his shoulder pressed against Kakashi's, he took it back and hesitantly leaned back into the pillows. He felt some of the tension leave his body as he sank into the mattress. "You're amazing, you know that?" Naruto looked over at Kakashi in surprise, but he was staring up at the ceiling. Naruto joined him. "I just told you that I'm losing control of my life, and that's your response." "I don't know anyone that works as hard as you," Kakashi elaborated. "More importantly, you care about people. Way more than anyone I've ever seen. You care so much that you give too much of yourself away, and you don't keep enough for yourself." Naruto blinked. He'd had the gist of it, but it was different to hear it verbalized. He knew part of the reason he did it was that he only had so much time, so he had to make the most of it while he could. He didn't need it as much as they did. "I guess," he allowed, "hopefully things will get easier now we have a Hokage again. Shikaku and I briefed her on what happened in the month we didn't have one, and she's got the logbook. I think it'll still be another few weeks before things settle down for good, but we're finally on our way. How is she? She's your godmother, right? I remember she visited once." "I don't remember that," he shrugged. "She didn't know I was alive, so she kind of gets a pass." Another comfortable silence passed over them. Naruto felt his eyes starting to close, so he took a big swig of his lukewarm tea to try and fight it off. He still had some reports to authorize after lunch. "I think I need to be harder on Ryo and Sakura," Kakashi spoke finally. "The world is a lot bigger and tougher than they realize, and I need to prepare them for that. I need to do a better job." Naruto frowned, turning over slightly to look at him. "Where did that come from?" he asked. "You've done a great job with them. Sasuke got promoted, and Ryo made the semifinals. Sakura was great too." Kakashi hesitated, but his shoulders slumped. "Itachi beat me," he said quietly. "I thought I'd mastered my Sharingan, but he just showed me how far I have to go. I have the Mangekyo Sharingan, and I've done nothing with it. I'm falling short as a shinobi, and I don't want to pass that on to them." Naruto turned back to look at the ceiling, but he gently rested his head on Kakashi's shoulder, trying to convey his silent support. He twisted the half-empty paper cup in his hands. "From what I know of the Mangekyo, the activation requirements are horrible. I personally hope Sasuke never has to activate it," he said softly. "Sure, it's powerful, but you are more than that, Kakashi. You've mastered hundreds of jutsu. You can track as well as the Inuzuka, and your taijutsu can compete with guys. I personally think that you're one of the strongest people I've ever met, and it has nothing to do with that. He didn't know why he and Kakashi always ended up spilling their worst thoughts to each other, but he was grateful. Kakashi wasn't someone that Naruto necessarily spoke to all the time or spent all his time with, but the man was always there when he needed him. At the point where Naruto felt he was finally going to break from all the pressure, Kakashi popped up to help relieve the burden even for a little while. Maybe it was because he was just as broken as Naruto, and equally as good at hiding it. This was a safe place for just the two of them. He took a deep breath. "When I was kidnapped, they put chakra-canceling seals on me," he admitted. "It was the first time since I was 3 that I've lost it, and I learned that I'm a shit shinobi without it. My other senses are so rusty and weak that I think a genin could take me out. Sometimes it feels like I'm cheating, you know? Without my sensing, I would just be a member of the regular forces. Nobody special and probably just barely making chunin. I wake up feeling the chain still on me, and I have to catalog the signatures around me to make sure I haven't lost it again." He's spoken about losing his sensing with Shikaku after the attack, or more like yelled it at him. He hadn't mentioned how much it was still haunting him. He knew some mental stress was normal after kidnapping, but he was determined for it not to affect his life. He also knew he needed to work on his other senses, so that would never happen again, but he was too scared to switch off his sensing. He hated not knowing who was sneaking up on him. He blinked rapidly to get rid of the tears burning at the edge of his eyes. "I activated the Mangekyo, when I killed my teammate. Naruto remained still, not wanting to put Kakashi off from sharing. He never talked about his team, and Naruto respected that. He couldn't imagine losing his teammates. Noera Rin. She was kidnapped and forced to become the Jinchuriki for the Sanbai. I fought them off, but she jumped in front of my Chidori. I can still feel my hand inside her chest sometimes. Naruto felt a warm glow in his chest at the level of vulnerability Kakashi entrusted him with, even as his heart ached for him. He knew Rin and Obito were sensitive subjects. He wondered if Kakashi felt that same feeling when Naruto shared his thoughts. He felt Kakashi's head fall softly onto his. "We make quite the pair, huh?" He laughed quietly. "What was it you said before?" Kakashi huffed back. "We have no idea what we're doing, and no one can tell us how to do it. We just have to forge ahead and make a bunch of mistakes and live with them for the rest of our lives." "I can't believe you remember that," Naruto chuckled, the sound a bit more genuine this time. He didn't have to feel bad about admitting his fears, because he knew Kakashi understood. It felt good just to tell someone about what was bothering him and not have to pretend that he was unaffected by the last couple of months. He knew he would have to tell his friend about his illness, but for now he was content to lie here and allow the comfortable silence to lull him to sleep. Tsunade was once again walking through the hospital corridor. It felt a bit easier this time. One of the nurses had confirmed Naruto was in the building and was currently visiting the Kappinin, who was due to be discharged in the next few minutes. Her godson was apparently in charge of making sure Kakashi didn't make run for it. She remembered bits and pieces of the young boy that followed Minato around like a lost puppy, but he was Ryo's Jounin sensei now. So much had changed in the village. She finally came to the door and knocked, entering before they had the chance to answer. Naruto smiled at her from where he was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the bed, apparently unsurprised to see her. Kakashi had just shrugged on his Jounin vest, but he froze in the middle of the movement. "I have been discharged, Hokage-sama," he said immediately, and Naruto snorted in laughter. She had been told he was a flight risk, so he was probably used to being told off by medical staff for leaving. "It's all right," she dismissed. "I'm here to talk to Naruto." Naruto cocked his head but slid off the bed, tightening his slightly frizzy ponytail as he stood. With a quiet thanks, Kakashi, he walked up to her, and she went back out the door, the redhead following her. She took him to one of the examination rooms and placed a thick file she was carrying onto one of the tables. She turned to see Naruto locking the door and placing a seal onto the wooden frame. "To keep anyone from listening in," he explained, turning resigned blue eyes back to her. "If I'm right, then I don't want anyone to hear this." Kanzuya said something. She gestured for him to sit on the edge of the examination table. He really was very observant. She was impressed. "Are you okay with this?" she asked gently. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable, and it's your right as a patient to have a say in who treats you. If you say no, then I'll respect that and assign someone more suitable." Naruto's face slackened in surprise, but no matter how much Tsunade wanted to help, she was a medic Nin first, which meant consent was her priority, not her feelings. She could compartmentalize this. She would have to if she wanted to be of any use. "I mean, I don't know if you'll be able to do anything," he said slowly, "but I guess you're the best, so yeah, I'm okay." She nodded, flipping open the file. It was a rare occasion that she saw one as thick and complicated as this one. What she'd read had been both horrifying and concerning, but she was determined not to lose hope. She had to be able to do something. "If you take off your vest and shirt, we can start with a bit of history and clinical examinations." Naruto dumped the items of clothing on the bed next to him, and Tsunade had a chance to see the scars and tattoos that the file detailed in person. The tattoo on his left did in fact go from his fingertips to his shoulder, like Jiraiya had described. That one was chakra blocker, so he couldn't use that hand in any seals or jutsu. He had 3 in a triangle formation on each side of his ribcage and another, slightly bigger 3 surrounding his belly button. Those were storage ones. She was pretty sure. Jiraiya had mentioned another on the back of his shoulder that was responsible for changing his appearance, and he had a final one on his collarbone that looked like the Uzushio symbol. Do you want to tell me about where the scars came from and any lingering damage from them? I thought that was all in my file. Naruto raised a single red eyebrow. I find it's better if I hear it from you, she reassured. Naruto shrugged and pointed to the faint white line on his face. I got this during the QB attack the same time I got the damage in my arm. He began, pointing a thick, gnarled one on his abdomen. I got this one when I was kidnapped. They stabbed me while I was escaping. No permanent damage. It just took a while to heal. The others are pretty small, and mostly from missions or training accidents. He paused before pointing to his clothed thigh a little too proudly. I got a great one on my thigh. He grinned. Ryo stabbed me with a kunai while he was playing catch with Sasuke. I don't think that can be qualified as great, Tsunade said dubiously. Can you tell me more about your illness? Naruto visibly deflated. I was diagnosed when I was 6 after I made a dumb mistake. The way they explained it, when I pushed chakra through my arm for a jutsu, I disrupted the healing pathways. They were delicate after the QB attack, but that kind of pushed it over the edge. It also released some of the QB's chakra that got stored in the cells of the scar tissue, and that spread to my chest and abdomen. It's corrosive and no one can extract it since it moved out of my chakra pathways and into the tissue itself. It's just kind of very slowly eating away at my organs. That was a visceral way of describing it. I'm going to examine you, okay? The technique might feel a bit warm or tingly, but that's completely normal. He nodded and she stepped forward, coating her hands in green medical chakra. As she began to run it up his left arm, and she asked him to describe some of the symptoms he'd been experiencing. The usual, I'm tired and dizzy, lost my appetite. I feel like my body is stiff and heavy like it's hard to move, he recited, obviously having had to do this before. I cough blood when it's really bad and the nausea comes and goes. I'm really prone to colds and flu. Basically, if there's a bug or virus going around, then I'll most likely get it. It also takes way more out of me than it would healthy people. I remember Yakushi-sensei saying that my immune system was weaker than most, and that was a normal part of this kind of chronic illness. Recently He stopped, and Tsunade moved her hands to his back, beginning to examine his heart and lungs. It's okay, she prompted. I can't sleep, he finally said. I get naps in maybe a few hours, but usually I just collapse out of exhaustion every so often. Or I fall asleep and wake up like 15 hours later. I don't do that often since I have work and the kids, but it's happened a couple times in the last month. She finished by scanning his liver and kidney, finally stepping back and going to sit in the seat, so they were roughly at the same level. She felt like she was going to be sick, but she could hold it together for a little longer. She couldn't show Naruto her true feelings, not as she wanted to be the one to treat him. How do you manage the symptoms? She asked instead, the full, awful picture piecing itself together in her mind. I drink ginger tea, he offered weakly. I kinda just don't. I let it run its course and manage it when it comes. I've gotten really good at hiding it, so I can control them to a certain extent for a short period of time. This was worse than Tsunade had imagined. She knew it was bad from reading his files alone, but the examination and history was even worse. What had his last doctor been doing? Look, I know I'm terminal, Naruto said bluntly, surprising her. So there's nothing you can say that would make it worse. I can't stop it, not completely. Saying those words felt like pulling teeth. She was meant to be the best in her field, yet she couldn't even save her godson. I can slow it down and make it a bit easier to live with. I can maybe get you a few more years, but I don't think you'll make it past 25 at most. Tsunade hated having to even utter those words, but she had to be honest with him. It was the least he deserved. Naruto just nodded, as if he was hearing everything he'd expected. Chronic illness is more about management than treatment, she expanded. The damage that has already been done is irreversible, but I can bring you in for weekly healing sessions that can at least slow down the rate of decay. I can also put you on medications that will help with the symptoms. Naruto immediately looked uncomfortable at the mention of medications. I don't want to take pills. We can find ones that keep the side effects to a minimum, but managing the symptoms will help with your overall health, she insisted. Having a well-managed condition might even extend your time by a year or two. I don't know why no one has suggested this to you sooner. Kazuya has done the best he can, Naruto said defensively. He makes sure I get my vitamins and that I eat and everything. I take some painkillers when it's at its worst, but I didn't want to take anything else. What about your last doctor? He did suggest medication a few years ago, but I said no. I didn't want the side effects, and it was better to deal with the symptoms I knew than learn to have to deal with new ones. There had to be some other form of care, though. Naruto hesitated this time. I'm terminal, he said quietly. There was nothing they could do to stop it. I'm not talking about that. She shook her head. Management still should have been a discussion. Even patients with only a few years to live deserve to be able to have good quality of life for those years. Naruto's mouth dropped open, and that's when Tsunade realized that this had never occurred to the kid. He had just been handed a shitty lot in life and been expected to deal with it. She was sure there would be people lining up to help him, but he refused to tell anyone which she had to respect. I honestly don't know how you've managed to hide this level of illness from people, but you can't continue like this. Please let me help you. We can control most of the symptoms you've mentioned. It would even make it easier to hide. I can't promise it will be perfect, but it will be miles better than how things are now. Naruto mulled over her words for a long moment. She could see the cogs turning behind his eyes. Okay, I'll try a couple at most, he gave in. Tsunade couldn't stop the proud smile that spread across her face. Thank you, she sighed in relief. If you come to my office on Sunday morning, I will have them ready for you. We can trial them to see if they work for you or if we need to try other ones. Naruto nodded as he hopped off the table, shrugging his shirt and jounin vest back on. He turned to leave when Tsunade called after him. You know you won't be able to hide this forever? The medications and healing will only do so much. He stopped but didn't turn back to face her. I know. He left, and Tsunade was left to write up his notes. This wasn't the way she'd expected to get to know her godson, but if she could do anything to make him more comfortable or to give him a few more years, she wouldn't hesitate. He deserved a lot more support than he had been given, and Tsunade hated to imagine him suffering for all these years. She wouldn't fail him again. Ryo slid into the booth, holding up his hands in apology. Sorry I'm late, he said quickly. I had to run to the mission assignment desk to hand in my report from my mission with Jiraiya. Nisan was expecting it, and I only finished it this morning. He made you write a report? Chuji asked, already munching on something in front of him. Usually it's the team leader that writes the report, but due to the importance of the mission and the encounter with Orochimaru, they need every angle of the mission to hand over to the intelligence department. Shikamaru spoke up, and Ryo stared at him in surprise. The Nara then proceeded to drop his head onto the table with a loud thunk. I've spent too much time at the desk, he groaned, muffled by the wood beneath his face. I never realized how much was involved in leading a team, Ino nodded. I'll never look at Asuma-sensei the same way again. Ryo's eyebrows rose in surprise. For some reason, he didn't expect anything to change in the month he'd been away. He'd managed to find a time to meet up with his friends, even if only Team 10 and Sakura could go. Team 8 and 9 were out on missions, and Sasuke was still on guard duty. Also Ryo. I feel like it is my legal obligation to inform you that your brother is insane, Shikamaru drawled, just barely raising his head off the table surface. Ryo still wasn't used to seeing his old friend wearing a Chunin vest. It was slightly big on him, but suited him in a way Ryo hadn't expected. His words caught his attention. Wait, why is Nisan insane? I genuinely have no idea how he's alive, Shikamaru elaborated. He probably single-handedly kept this village running while we didn't have a Hokage from how much work he did. I think you're being a bit dramatic, Sakura raised an eyebrow. Shikamaru lifted his head fully and rolled his eyes. Okay, maybe not single-handedly, but you have to admit he was everywhere. Yeah, I kind of noticed that. Ino brushed the end of her ponytail back over her shoulder. He talked me through how to write and submit reports, and I swear half the village traipsed through his office. He always brings his work home with him, Sakura added. Every time I went into the apartment, if he was home, he was at the kitchen table sorting through paperwork or seals. Rio hadn't expected to talk about Nissan so much when meeting up with his friends, but it was a reminder that he still needed to talk to him. He had so much to learn about Nissan. He was obviously much more important to the village than he let on to Rio. So, you guys have been a team. He changed the topic. He'd rather ask Nissan about this himself. Yeah, since you were away and Sasuke and Shikamaru were promoted, Naruto just put me on Team 10, Sakura answered. We've just been helping civilians and rebuilding what we could. It's been all deer ranks, but I feel like we've actually made a difference. It was interesting being able to get to know some of the civilians, Chuji added. Being from a clan, we never really had a reason to speak to them, since we generally keep to the compound unless we visit the other clans. Yeah, I totally agree, Ino grinned. We managed to bag some more businesses for Yamanaka flowers to supply, and some of the Chunins totally like me. I'm going to ace the next Chunin exams. I saw Hideki-sensei hide when he saw you enter the room more than once. Sakura accused in good humor. Lies. I saw it too, Ino. My own team is turning against me. Ino raised a palm to her forehead, as if she were about to faint. I don't think I'm ever going to get over the betrayal. The three broke into fits of laughter, and even Shikamaru smiled slightly as he watched them. Rio forced a smile onto his face, but internally he didn't know what to feel. Sakura and Ino's relationship appeared to have evolved again into something even stronger. He didn't think he'd ever seen Sakura speak this much to Shikamaru and Chuji either. They had changed since he'd left with Jiraiya. They had inside jokes and an easy camaraderie that Rio felt he couldn't join. He was missing too much context. He kept trying to tell himself that this was natural. They weren't going to stay the same forever, and he knew he had changed while away on the mission. Not noticeably, but meeting so many new people and experiencing so many different towns was inevitably going to have an effect on him. He knew if he was ever offered the chance to leave the village on another trip, he would take it in a heartbeat. He loved traveling and the complete freedom that came with it. He learned things that he wouldn't have ever encountered within the village walls. He was forging his own path under his own terms. He just felt a bit sad. It felt like they'd lost something. The memories of their time in the academy felt so far away. There was a level of anxiety about how his relationships would continue to change, and he tried to tell himself that it would be for the better. He'd been away for a while. He would get back into the swing of things soon, and it would all go back to normal, or as close to normal as things could be right now. So, what was it like learning from one of the Sannin? Ino leaned forward curiously, jolting Rio out of his musings. Rio shoved his thoughts to the back of his mind, focusing on the here and now. There was no point in worrying about the future if he didn't appreciate the present he already had. Well, first of all, he paused for dramatic effect. He is a massive pervert. He laughed at their outraged response and continued to talk about his time away. Things would be okay. He wasn't going to lose his friends. They weren't out of his reach. A little time away wouldn't be enough to take away what they had. Naruto paused to let Momo sniff the corner of one of the buildings. The beautiful morning sunshine brightened up the village around them, and a gentle breeze caressed his cheeks. It wasn't too busy yet, but he could see the villagers starting their day. He loved moments like this. It reminded him of how much he loved Konoha. It was the small, everyday things. Momo was apparently satisfied with her investigations into that particular corner, and they resumed walking. She was all grown up. Naruto could remember when she first came to live with them. She'd been so small and fuzzy. Her peach coat now faded beautifully into the cream beneath her chin and on her belly, her fluffy tail curling over her back, and her perked ears twitched at every sound. Her intelligent brown eyes took in the sights around them with the same joy and curiosity she had every day, and Naruto hoped she never changed. The Shiba Inu was a constant source of comfort. He knew he was never really alone with her around. So Kakashi has taken the kids on a trip. Naruto nodded as he turned his head to look at his best friend. They were maintaining a slow pace for Kinzuya, but Naruto marveled at the progress he'd made. Only last week he'd still been visiting the brunette in the hospital with what looked like weeks of recovery still to go. Now he was walking right next to Naruto, granted with a cane, but that was still miles ahead of where he'd been. His hair had grown slightly past his eyes in a couple of months he'd been hospitalized, and he was wrapped in a thick gray cardigan. He'd lost a lot of weight and muscle. The bags beneath his eyes were starting to fade, and while he was still pale, the hollowness in his cheeks had started to fill out again. The medical education assignment had done wonders for his mental health, and Naruto had caught him smiling more in the past 2 days than in the past month. Kazuya had never been good at putting up a front. Naruto could see the frustration and sadness and anger at his situation. He hoped that now he could start moving. He'd work through that. He hadn't said anything, but he knew Kazuya had lost a lot of confidence. Usually he was the first to insert himself into any social situation, normally to get the freshest gossip, but he took great pains to avoid his colleagues when he went in for physiotherapy. The only thing that might help his time, and Naruto was prepared to do anything he could to help. It was the least he could do after everything Kazuya had done for him. Yeah, he nodded. He thinks that since they've all been apart for a while, that they needed a bonding session. I'm pretty sure he's planning to tie their wrists together and unleash them into the wilderness to see how long they can evade him together. And Sasuke agreed to this? Apparently training is training, he shrugged. He was looking for a break from guard duty anyway. Kazuya laughed for a moment before becoming thoughtful. Has Kakashi been talking to Gemma-sensei again? He did that training exercise with us when he was preparing us for the Kimochunin exams, right? Naruto remained silent, looking away from his friend. Naruto, don't tell me you gave up our secrets. Don't tell the kids? Naruto asked weakly. Kazuya shook his head, but the smile remained on his face. That exercise really wasn't fair on Gemma-sensei. Not with you and Hana on our team, he continued. It might be better since Kakashi is a tracking expert, but I feel kind of bad for the kids. Ryo might do well with his enhanced senses, but the other two are in for a ride. Naruto had to agree with him. You're keeping tabs on them, right? He nodded, feeling their signatures at the very edge of his range. Thankfully, Kakashi didn't take them very far, but his range had improved either way. He'd had it extended to its maximum since the attack, so it was bound to get better. It had taken some adjustment to filter the incredible volume of information, so it didn't overwhelm him, but he'd gotten into a rhythm now. Uzumaki-sama, they stopped to see a woman approaching with a shy smile. Her long platinum hair and pale blue eyes were a dead giveaway of her clan, and she was around their age, maybe older. She wore the standard Chunin uniform, and an old memory sparked in Naruto's brain. Yamanaka Yui, right? He smiled back. You helped with the interrogations on the Otonin. I've heard Marino-san say you were pretty good. Marino-san said that. She stopped in front of them, holding out a hand for Momo to sniff. Well, as close as Marino-san can get to giving a compliment, he chuckled. She laughed with him, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. I don't really compare to you, Uzumaki-sama. Internally he groaned, but kept a friendly grin in place. Please call me Naruto, he asked lightly. You really don't need to keep calling me that. The people in my department do it as a joke. She flushed a light pink, shyly looking away from him. Naruto frowned. Surely it wasn't that much of a task for her to call him by his name. She didn't need to be embarrassed. He tried to ask everyone at least a few times before he gave up. Was it too much to ask that he be called by his name? Of course, Naruto-san. He was too busy reveling in his victory to notice the glances she kept sending him. Thanks, Yusan. He smiled widely. One person down, the whole of Konoha to go, right? She laughed a bit too hard, and Naruto raised an eyebrow questioningly. It hadn't been that funny. Have you had breakfast yet? She asked eagerly. I know a lovely place just down the street. Naruto shook his head apologetically. I don't have time right now. He scratched the back of his neck sheepishly. But I can mention something to Marino-san about taking pastries to the meeting in a couple of weeks. I'm sure our teams could benefit from getting to know each other better. He was confused when Yui sagged slightly in disappointment, even as she tried to hide it with an enthusiastic smile. Surely improving departmental relations could only be a good thing? She was the one who mentioned breakfast. Thanks, Yusan, Kanzuya interrupted, resting a hand on Naruto's shoulder. We better get Momo back to our flat before work, but Naruto will definitely consider your offer. He shoved Naruto forward, and he caught his footing, shooting Kanzuya a dirty look. What offer? Why was he mouthing, "I'm so sorry," back to Yui-san? You can be so dense, you know that. Kanzuya shook his head. That poor girl. What are you talking about? Naruto asked, annoyed. That girl has a massive crush on you, Kanzuya answered pointedly. She also just tried to ask you out, and you didn't even notice. Instead, you said our teams could benefit from getting to know each other better. Why did you start talking about that? Why else would she suggest breakfast? Naruto frowned. I thought she wanted to talk about work or something, so wouldn't it be better to have the rest of our departments there? I even took on her idea of having food there. Kanzuya face-palmed. Does it even occur to you? I mean, you're almost 16 now. He asked seriously. Are you interested in anybody? No, Naruto said honestly. I don't look at people and think they're hot, or I would like to kiss them. It just doesn't occur to me, Kaz. I don't get it. I have no interest in pursuing something like that, and even if I did, that's just one more person at my funeral. Kanzuya considered his words. You really never think about that stuff? Naruto shook his head. I thought you were all faking it for a while, he shrugged. Like I have no concept of what it is that makes you look at someone and think about having sex with them. I don't get any of it. I don't even see the appeal of dating. There's a bunch of expectations that come with a relationship that I know I can't match, and I have enough going on to worry about navigating all that shit. He sighed. Sometimes I feel like everyone knows something that I don't, that I'm missing the piece of the puzzle that will make the whole thing make sense. The issue is if you have never experienced it, how do you know what it is? He squared his shoulders, looking over at his friend with determined eyes. But you know what? I don't think I'm missing anything. Sure, I don't spend my days thinking about sex or relationships, but I have loads of other stuff that makes me happy. I have people that make me happy and fulfilled, and that I have a connection with. I don't see why the platonic parts of a relationship matter less than romantic ones. I think they matter more. He let out a heavy breath. He hadn't intended on letting all of that out. He knew Kaz and his team had an idea, but they thought he would grow out of it or that he just didn't have time for that stuff. It was true that he didn't have the time, but he also didn't have the desire. He didn't think they really understood that it wasn't even a thought. He'd much rather just sit on the couch with Momo and work on seals, or spend time with the kids or his friends. He waited for Kanzuya to process his words, listening to the growing bustle of activity around them. He knew he was different from his teammates. They took after their Jounin sensei. He was different to almost everyone he knew, but his asexuality was only a small part of that. Between raising his kids from such a young age, graduating early, his position at the desk, his Fuinjutsu, even his illness, Naruto had always felt like he was operating on a different wavelength from the people around him. He had people that got him, so he didn't necessarily see it as a bad thing. He had a unique perspective, and he was happy with the way he was. Thanks for explaining it to me. His head snapped round so he could stare at Kanzuya. He hadn't even realized they'd stopped moving. Kanzuya offered him a subdued smile. I can't understand it, but I don't have to, you know? How would I understand if I've never experienced it? But I can respect it. I'll stop teasing you about that kind of stuff. I've always got your back. You know that, right? Naruto felt a burst of joy in his chest, and he flung his arms around his brother. Thank you, Kanzuya, he murmured into his friend's shoulder. He let go a little, still keeping his hands on Kanzuya's shoulders. You can still talk about all that stuff even if I don't get it. Some of your stories are hilarious, and I don't want you to feel like you have to avoid the topic entirely. Just don't try and shove it onto me. His joking tone at the end prompted a warm smile from Kanzuya. You got it, Eiki-chan. Chapter 41. Bridge over troubled waters, Hana led the way up the stairs of the apartment building, finally reaching the 9th floor and not bothering to knock on the door as she entered Naruto's and Kanzuya's flat. Gunma-sensei was following close behind, and they kicked their sandals off. It had been a while since they'd had one of their team dinners. The whole kidnapping and invasion had thrown things into awry, but it was Saturday night, and they were all in the village. Kanzuya was due to get off work within the hour and would meet them there, and the Chunin at the front desk had told them Naruto had already gone home for the day. Team 7 were out of the village, so they had the place to themselves. She dumped the takeout on top of the kitchen table as Gunma-sensei looked around for the redhead. Momo trotted out of the bathroom to investigate before turning right back around, disappearing through the door once again. Hana frowned. That was weird. Momo was usually so welcoming. Another weird thing, Naruto still hadn't come out to greet them. She knew he could sense them coming. She walked over to the bathroom door and her heart rate spiked as a familiar smell of iron invaded her sensitive nose. She quickened her pace and flung the wooden door wide open, freezing at the sight that greeted her. Naruto was curled up beside the toilet, wrapped in a fluffy, blue blanket. His head was resting on the wall behind him, and she'd never seen him so pale. There was blood and vomit coating the inside of the toilet, and red droplets stuck to his chin, leaking out the corner of his mouth. He looked over at her, and his blue eyes were so foggy and dull, she almost didn't recognize him. His red hair was tied back into a low bun that was falling apart, and strands stuck to his forehead, highlighting the sweat covering his face. Momo rested her head in his lap, whining gently. She remained frozen, her eyes glued to her friend, as Genma entered the room behind her. With a loud shit, he pushed past her and knelt beside Naruto, raising a hand to his cheek. Naruto's head lolled and Hana's panic only intensified. He was sick, really sick. Genma-sensei, we have to get him to a hospital. Before he could respond, Naruto finally moved, shaking his head. No, he slurred. I'll be okay. You're coughing blood, Naruto, Genma-sensei said urgently, grabbing some toilet paper to wipe the blood off his face. You need help. Naruto just shook his head again, suppressing another round of coughs. I'm having a bad day, he insisted. I don't need to go to the hospital. They can't help. Hana really didn't like the sound of that. You don't know that. Genma-sensei shook his head before he stopped. The only reason you would say that is if you knew what it was. Naruto looked away guiltily, and Hana didn't think it could get much worse. He tapped Momo's head, and the dog obediently stood and walked a short distance away. She still hovered nearby, and Hana knew how many times this had to have happened to have the Shiba Inu so well trained. Too many. Naruto rose to stand, but a massive heave passed through his body, and he shoved Genma-sensei out of the way as he coughed more blood into the toilet, eventually subsiding into dry heaves. Sorry, Naruto quietly muttered as he flushed the toilet and pulled himself to his feet, staggering over to the sink to wash his mouth out and clean his hands. He kept a firm grip on the blanket with one hand as he rested the other one on the wall, using it to support his steps. It was all Hana could do to silently follow him, sharing a terrified look with Genma-sensei behind his back. Naruto fell onto one of the couches and ended up in a half-sitting position. Momo immediately jumped up to rest on his lower body. Hana sat on the edge of the other sofa, Genma-sensei beside her. She just kept looking at the ghost of her teammate. Would you please stop looking at me like I'm about to drop dead? Naruto rolled his eyes and anger rose up within Hana at his nonchalance. Well, are you? She demanded. Naruto cringed and looked down at Momo, sighing heavily. He ran a hand through her soft fur. Not yet. What does that even mean? Naruto hesitated for another long moment, and Hana couldn't take it. Her friend was seriously ill, and he didn't even care. Where was Kanzuya? Did he know about this? He began. I had a training accident when I was younger, long before we graduated. Long story short, it caused damage. A lot of damage. I won't make it past 25. He rubbed his free hand down his face in frustration. I don't know if I'm explaining this right. I should have rehearsed it. When you say you won't make it past 25... Attention turned to Genma-sensei, who had somehow lost his Senban. This is terminal. Terminal. Hannah didn't know how to process that word. Logically, she knew what it meant, but she couldn't apply it to the friend in front of her. It didn't feel real. Yeah, Naruto quietly admitted, as if that didn't change Hannah's whole world. Fuck, Naruto. Why didn't you tell me it had gotten worse? Gunma-sensei exploded. Just because we're not an official team doesn't mean we don't care about you. You should have told me. Something about Gunma-sensei's wording stuck with Hannah. You knew he was sick. Gunma-sensei stopped short. I mean, yeah, I had to know his medical history, as his Jounin-sensei. I knew there would be some measure of deterioration, and that he had a compromised immune system. But nothing like this. So, I was the only one who didn't know. Her voice was tiny, but still managed to echo throughout the room. Surely she would have noticed. Why did she notice? It was happening right under her nose and God's. She was supposed to have medical training, and she couldn't even see her teammates suffering in front of her. Even trying to think of times where Naruto was ill or off was a struggle. He was in the hospital after their Chunin exams, but she thought that was the soldier pills. How many times had she been wrong like that? I'm sorry, Hannah. Naruto spoke up quietly, looking very small all of a sudden. It's not just you. Ryo and Sasuke don't know either. The only people who know are Kanzuya, Shikaku, and Tsunade, and Kanzuya only knows because he was there for the accident. I promise I didn't keep it from you because I didn't trust you or care about you, but I didn't want to tell anyone. I still don't. These kinds of symptoms didn't even start until 3 years after we made Chunin. Gods! Ryo didn't know his brother was dying. This was such a mess. Don't you think the people who love you deserve to know? Naruto shook his head. Why? Gunma-sensei demanded. Why do you have to be the martyr and suffer in silence? Are we so unreliable? That word seemed to stir something in Naruto. Because of the way you're looking at me right now, he yelled, coughing wetly into his fist. Hannah blinked. She was in too much shock to register what she was projecting. She felt the tears at the edge of her vision, and this only served to distress Naruto further. I wanted you to live your lives without this hanging over your heads, he said a little quieter. Can you honestly tell me that every time you look at me, you won't think of my illness? That you're not going to treat me any differently? That seemed to shock Gunma-sensei into submission, and Hannah couldn't blame him. She couldn't refute Naruto's words. She was already thinking about how much time he had left, how much he was going to miss in the future. There was always the risk of death in missions, and many had died younger. Hannah knew the odds of them making it past 25, even while they were healthy, weren't the greatest, but for it to be because of an illness? That struck differently somehow. I'm in pain almost every day, Naruto continued firmly. I have really good days and really bad days, and some mediocre days. I'm tired and feel like shit, but I'm the one who has to live like this. I don't get a choice. I have to accept it. You are not going to make me feel guilty for controlling the only thing I can. I will not have people treating me like glass or looking at me like I'm already dead in the few years I have left. I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, but I will never be sorry for trying to live my life as normally as possible, and I will not apologize for thinking you deserve better than worrying about me all the time. A stunned silence fell over the room. Hannah didn't think she'd ever felt so hurt. How well did she really know Naruto? If he was able to hide something like this, then what else was he lying about? She was on a team with him for 3 years, his classmate for 2. He'd known this guy for almost 10 years, but right now, she didn't feel like she knew him at all. I'm not just lying down and taking it, Naruto tried to reassure them. I'm starting healing sessions with Tsunade tomorrow to slow it down and medications to stop days like this happening. I'm going to stick around for as long as I can. Just please don't tell anyone. That did not make Hannah feel better. She stood abruptly, turning to march to the front door. It opened before she had a chance to reach for the handle, and Kanzuya's smiling face appeared in her view. Hey, Hannah, he greeted. Ready for team bonding time? She didn't respond and grabbed her sandals, shoving them roughly onto her feet. She couldn't deal with this right now. Kanzuya frowned and looked over her shoulder. Realization dawned on him as she straightened up. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Why? She demanded lowly, refusing to look at him. It wasn't for me to tell, he shrugged helplessly. She shook her head, barging past and flying down the stairs. The tears finally overwhelmed her, and she found herself collapsing just out of sight of the apartment building, sucking in the chilled night air desperately as she sobbed. Naruto sat in silence as Tsunade ran her hands over his back, the green healing chakra still feeling as warm and tingly as the first time she'd done it 3 weeks ago. He couldn't tell if it was making a difference or not, but the medications hadn't been as bad as he'd thought. He had noticed he was coughing less and he had headaches less frequently. He was still exhausted and achy, but that could just as likely be from overworking himself. Once Hana had left, he decided to give her space. She'd been actively avoiding him since that night, and Naruto couldn't bring himself to blame her. It was a lot. He didn't regret hiding it, but he did hate the way she'd found out. It must have been awful to feel like the odd man out. Gunma-sensei had been slightly more understanding, but every time Naruto saw him, Gunma-sensei had this mournful look on his face. So he was avoiding Gunma-sensei. Kanzuya was just avoiding talking about it, but it lingered, hovering in the background like a dark cloud. It was a huge mess. He never intended to hurt anyone, least of all one of his oldest friends, and their reaction had made him want to tell people even less. He had even considered never telling anyone, just going off a mission one day and never coming back. He knew he couldn't think like that. Kanzuya would bring him back to kill him again if he ever attempted it, but it seemed like the easier option. There was a voice in the back of his head that whispered it was the coward's way out, but he tried to ignore it. Who knew if Hana was ever going to speak to him again? What if his kids had the same reaction? Then they would all just spend the rest of his days miserable. It's a bit early to see if you're making progress, but you mentioned the meds have helped. He nodded as he pulled his long-sleeved shirt back on, leaving his jounin vest for the moment. So far, yeah. Tsunade walked around her desk to take her seat opposite him, writing notes down in the file in front of her. She closed it over, clasping her hands together as she looked at him intently. I wanted to talk to you about something else, she said firmly. I think we need to redefine your role in the village. Naruto froze. What did that mean? He hadn't fucked up recently that he could think of. Has someone complained? From what I've been able to gather, other than your official roles as head of the mission assignment desk and sole member of the sealing division, no one can quite keep track of what exactly you're doing, which means you take on too much. Naruto couldn't argue that point, so he waited silently for her to continue. You've done excellent work for the village. She leaned back in her chair. Your seals would be enough on their own. When I found out about the gender-changing seal and the impact it had on both the academy curriculum and infiltration missions, I couldn't quite believe it. You're on Minato's and Jiraiya's level in that regard. I understand that you also provide security seals for the village as a whole, and the staff at the hospital have spoken very highly of the ones you've made for them. He nodded along, not quite sure where she was going with this. Then you also run the desk, but I don't think your role as head was properly explained to you. You do a lot of extra work that you shouldn't be. You need to start delegating. No more organizing missions and conducting debriefs, unless it is an S rank or something goes horribly wrong on the mission. You need to let your department pick up that slack. You can check over things and have the final say, but you need to stop involving yourself in the process so much. All the time you lose doing the extra work is time better spent elsewhere. The staff at the desk are more than capable. His mouth opened and closed, but no words emerged. He did trust his team. He knew they were all more than capable. That wasn't the issue. It was just, this is what he'd always done. Just because he was technically their boss shouldn't mean that he got to escape his share of the work. Giving up that part of the job will mean you have more time to complete the rest of your work in reasonable hours, she said, her voice turning stern. I have heard about you doing the seal work in your breaks, and that shouldn't be happening. You suck at time management. He blinked at the blunt statement. Think of yourself more as an overseer of the desk, she said a bit more gently. You keep the gears turning smoothly, but you are not one of them. I want you to take a look at your workload and actually allocate time for working on Fuinjutsu and any meetings related to it. We'll have another meeting to discuss that, as I have a feeling you don't actually know what a reasonable workload looks like. Naruto felt like he'd just been run over by an Akimichi. This was the last thing he'd expected to hear today. He knew he had a tendency to bring his work home with him, and yes, maybe he sometimes took on too much, but she was making it sound so dramatic. He didn't think he was that bad. What has happened is that responsibilities and tasks have just been piled onto you over the years, and no one has taken the time to help you streamline what is important and what can be done by others. What I'm also going to do is split your time between the desk and the diplomacy department. So pick some members of the desk to handle things when you're away. You have a good relationship with most of the other villages, and it would be a waste to not use that. How many people had she spoken to about this? I understand that this is a lot to take in, but it's for your own good. She smiled at him. Making things a bit more structured and defined is going to help you find a work-life balance, which is going to do wonders for your health. This is part of your treatment. Not being exhausted and overworked is going to do just as much good as those medications. You're also only 16. Your life should be more than meetings and paperwork. Naruto could only nod. It would probably take a while for him to process it all, but he got the gist of what she was trying to do. He really had just taken on every responsibility flung his way and just gotten on with it, never once questioning it. He'd never felt like he had to. Everyone was working hard, and he wasn't an exception. It was his job to look after these people, and if that meant taking on a bit extra so they could focus on their jobs, he didn't see that as a problem. Sure, he was busy, but weren't they all? He felt like she was making a bigger deal than was strictly necessary, but she was the Hokage now. He couldn't argue against orders. Yes, Hokage-sama. He bowed his head, before glancing up cheekily. You're really taking this seriously, huh? I may have had reservations about taking the hat, but I am not going to half-ass this. That would be more disrespectful to Dan and the Waki than running away ever was. I am responsible for each and every person in this village, and I intend to be more proactive than Sarutobi-sensei was. She said seriously before grimacing. You don't have to call me that, you know. You're my godson first, soldier second. Would you prefer Bachan? He laughed as he ducked to avoid the brush thrown at his head. Don't you dare, brat. She warned even as the edges of her lip were pulled in amusement. He grabbed his vest and threw out a "see you," Bachan, struggling to dodge the book launched at him through his laughter. He closed the doors behind him and took a moment to breathe. Things were really going to change. He didn't quite know what the future was going to look like yet, but he was determined not to falter. Tsunade did have a point. He didn't want to spend the rest of his time stuck in the office, even if he did like the work and people there. He wanted to train and create more seals and spend more time with the kids and help the village in new ways, and even with the shadow of Hana and Genma-sensei hanging over him, he felt hopeful. He just had to keep putting one foot in front of the other. Kanzuya knocked on the staff room door, poking his head in hesitantly. Irika looked up from the mess of paper strewn across the table in front of him. Hey, Irika! Kanzuya waved awkwardly. One of the other Chunins told me I'd find you here. Yeah, this is about the medical curriculum, isn't it? Irika smiled brightly, and he gestured to the seat next to him eagerly. I'm so happy for you. I know how much you wanted this to happen. Thanks. Kanzuya smiled back as he sank down into the worn sofa. He dumped the scrolls he'd been carrying on top of the papers, hoping they weren't too important. I've got just over a month before I need to present it to Hokage-sama, so I figured getting some perspective from people already teaching would help with building lesson plans. I'm here for anything you need. Irika nudged his shoulder with his own. I owe you for all the tea you've introduced to me. You were the one to show me that soba place. Kanzuya chuckled. I never go anywhere else now. The kids have threatened to strike if I bring home takeout from that place again. Irika laughed, and Kanzuya allowed himself to melt into the couch a little. He was walking on his own now, and had even started his training regime back up. It was the one from way back when he was a genin, but he knew the rest would come with time. He was just glad to be making progress at all. So, what were you thinking? Kanzuya shook himself out of his thoughts and leaned forward, sorting through the scrolls. Well, I was thinking of focusing on the 3rd and 4th years. He began. I might introduce some anatomy lessons in 2nd year, but I don't want to overcomplicate things. It would also help with their taijutsu and weapons handling, but I need to figure out how to translate it into terms that 9-year-olds are going to be able to remember. Irika nodded thoughtfully. They get a bit on the tenketsu points and major blood vessels right now, but nothing substantial, he commented. I think anatomy would be a great idea. It could be quite visual, right? Yes, Kanzuya agreed quickly, pulling open a scroll and handing it to the other man. Diagrams like these would be used, but I was also thinking of maybe getting them to draw on themselves a bit. It's much easier to remember on yourself, and it's interactive. A good concept, but could end up pretty messy. Yeah, I get what you mean. What about a model? I could make one out of clay. Only one since it would take me forever, but it might work. He made a note. I'll look into it. Also with the worksheets. Irika had picked up another scroll. I think you should stick with labeling exercises, at least for the younger years. Got it. Kanzuya made another note. Thank you so much for helping me with this. Hey, I want this curriculum as much as you, Irika smiled. I think you're pretty incredible, sticking with it all these years without knowing if it would ever happen. Kanzuya felt a soft flutter in his stomach at Irika's words, and he stomped them out immediately. Irika may be cute and funny and nice, but nothing could happen. Kanzuya couldn't have another Tetsuya-san. It was probably just because he hadn't had sex in over 3 months. He hadn't been able to bring himself to get back into that habit, even when he'd finally lost the cane. It just seemed harder than it did before. He knew he didn't have the physique he used to have, and he'd missed out on a lot. Before the mission to Kiri, he'd prided himself on being one of the biggest wheels in the gossip mills. He'd tried to keep it up after he'd woken up, but it wasn't the same. He didn't know who was dating who or the department drama. It seemed small and shallow, but it gave Kanzuya something to talk about, something to connect to people with. A part of him felt that if he went back to the clubs, that no one would want him. He didn't have as much to offer, and even if he was just looking for a bit of fun, the sting of rejection hit just as hard. Things were still awkward with Hana and Gunma-sensei, and he didn't feel comfortable asking anyone to go with him as he was now. He was pretty sure Naruto had never taken a step into a club or bar and was adamant on keeping it that way. He really liked Irika. He was a friendly ear and was easy to relax and be himself around. He loved the team meetups they had and didn't want to do anything to jeopardize it. He was happy to have the man as just a friend, and he long ago accepted this. Sometimes he felt like he was getting something more from Irika, but he knew he was just reading into things. Irika was a great person. He was probably this nice to everyone. I'm just stubborn. Kanzuya waved off his praise. What do you think about having first aid drills on field trips? It wasn't his most elegant change of subject, but it served to bring the focus back on the work in front of them. They continued to discuss the details, and Kanzuya's skin tingled every time they brushed hands reaching for different scrolls. He may not be able to do anything about it, but maybe he could enjoy it, just for now. Sasuke slouched on the couch, scowling at the piece of paper on the coffee table. Momo had disappeared off somewhere, so he was left with his one-sided staring contest with an inanimate object. He only glared harder. A Rio for your thoughts? He startled as Naruto plopped himself onto the other couch, a hand threading through Momo's thick fur. Anyone who said that the dog didn't have a favorite was clearly blind. He slumped back into position as Naruto waited patiently for him to speak. I can become a clan head, he said abruptly, since I'm a Chunin and the oldest living loyal shinobi. I thought to be classed as a clan you needed at least 5 members, but they said that didn't apply to me. Considering what happened, Naruto nodded. You also need techniques or bloodlines unique to your clan and evidence of multi-generational history and teachings, he added, which the Uchiha clan has an abundance of. He fell quiet once again, and Sasuke sighed, rubbing his eyes tiredly. I know that, and I do want to rebuild my clan, he admitted. I just don't know if I can become clan head with Itachi still out there. I don't want to rebuild with unfinished business. That makes sense, Naruto said understandingly. As it stands now, you wouldn't have to perform many of the conventional clan head duties. You won't be able to start building up the clan for a few years yet, so essentially what they are offering you right now is a seat at the table. You'd have a voice in meetings and such. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. I just want you to be fully informed, Naruto shrugged. Sasuke looked back at the daunting piece of paper. It's also okay if you don't feel ready for it, the redhead continued. Most don't take over until they're at least Jounin level and have a bit of training under their Hittite from their predecessors. You can take the time to familiarize yourself with the history and traditions of the Uchiha clan first. It's all at the compound in storage. That way, when you take down Itachi, you'll be ready to take the title as prepared as you can be. Sasuke mulled those words over. He had let things fall to the wayside when it came to learning about his clan. Normally his parents would have passed it on to him, and he would have attended Uchiha history lessons, but he'd lost all that, living away from the compound. It was easy to ignore sometimes. A piece of him just didn't want to go back to a place so filled with ghosts, but he'd have to get over that. If he wanted to represent the Uchiha clan to the best of his ability, he would have to know as much about them as his father did. A big part of that was knowing the truth about that night and the events leading up to it. Did you find anything else out? Naruto groaned, leaning his head back onto the couch cushion. I'm still trying to track down more information, he sighed. I think the key to this whole thing is those non-ambu I told you about, but I still haven't managed to catch one. They have those chakra-concealing seals which I can follow, but they must have another kind hiding their lair. Sasuke nodded his head in acknowledgement, but hid his small smile. It meant a lot that Naruto was still pursuing this even after 5 years. Whenever he talked about Sasuke confronting Itachi, he always spoke as if Sasuke defeating Itachi was inevitable. It was comforting, especially since Sasuke still doubted himself in his darkest moments. I'll keep trying, Naruto followed up quickly, as if it was in doubt. Now Tsunade is in power. Things have changed, and I don't think she would try to hide something like this. Sasuke wasn't so sure, but he'd been burned by those in power before. He was sad to see the Sandaime fall to Orochimaru, if only because he died with answers that Sasuke needed. Come on, Momo. Let's leave Sasuke to think. Naruto ruffled the dog's fur and stood, winking at Sasuke. You'll make the right choice, and whatever you decide, we'll have your back. Sasuke just nodded as Naruto headed out of the flat, Momo in tow. He turned his gaze back to the document. He had a lot to think about. Maybe he should visit the compound first. He had time. Naruto cursed as he spun around the civilians walking through the streets, trying not to barge into anyone. Shikaku had asked to meet him at some yakisoba place, and he was running late. He'd gotten distracted by a new seal, and by the time he'd realized the time, it was dark. He yelled an apology over his shoulder at the poor woman. He almost trampled as he finally caught sight of the restaurant. He slowed and made sure his bun was still in place. He could have sworn he'd felt something loosen, and he didn't want to end up eating his hair. He stopped just inside the doorway and scanned the packed tables. It was nice here. Warm wooden floors and red walls. The round tables each had a candle in the middle casting a soft light. He couldn't see Shikaku anywhere. Did he beat him here? Uzumaki-san. His attention was drawn to the source of the voice. A young woman had stood from her table, immediately identifiable as a Nara by her dark eyes and long, spiky black hair. She was pretty young, about his age, and there was a sharpness to her features he was used to seeing in Shikamaru. Wearing a light, tan kimono and a deep green obi, she bowed low in greeting. Naruto automatically returned it, moving closer. He didn't have a good feeling about this. I am Nara Chio. She gestured for him to sit. Thank you for meeting with me today. I thought I was supposed to be meeting with Shikaku, he said in a questioning tone. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise, and the dread just grew stronger. Nara-sama didn't tell you? Tell me what? This was a compatibility meeting, she hesitated, seeming unsure. Nara-sama thought it would be a good idea for us to get to know each other. He thought we might click, to use his words. The warm air suddenly became suffocating, the red walls starting to close in. This is about an arranged marriage? She looked even more uncomfortable. Sort of, she offered. It was more to see if one would work for us. Naruto couldn't control the fury welling up within him. How dare Shikaka do this to him? He thought the man knew him better than this. He always joked about marrying Naruto into the clan for his abilities, but they'd been just that, jokes. He didn't know what had prompted the man to pull a stunt like this, but Naruto was not having it. Naruto, you've wasted your time, he stood, the chair making a loud screech as he shoved it back. I am not, nor will I ever enter an arranged marriage with the Nara clan or otherwise. He began to stomp away, but couldn't stop himself from turning around. You can also pass on to Nara-sama that he can go fuck himself, he yelled, drawing the stares of the surrounding patrons. He better fucking avoid me in the future, or I'll shove his precious shogi board so far down his throat he'll shit playing pieces for a goddamn month. He left a vaguely shaking and probably terrified girl and slammed open the shop door, marching down the street. Where did Shikaka get the nerve to try and trap him like this? He would have known that Naruto would have refused to go if he'd told him, so he lied, and that was the most hurtful part. Shikaka knew him well enough by now. A part of him knew the man only meant well, but the larger, angrier part of him didn't care. He couldn't go home or to work. Shikaka would probably try to find him the minute Chiyo reported back. The Hokage mountain was out, and so was the memorial stone. All of his usual hiding places were. He cursed the man for knowing him so well. He passed a bookstore, and an idea sparked. He located the chakra and signature and took to the rooftops. He quickly came to the building, and he walked down the outer wall until he found the right window. Knocking a bit harder than necessary, he felt the signature move, and the window swung open. Naruto? Hey, Kakashi! Can I hide here? He didn't wait for a reply as he hopped in, Kakashi closing the window behind him. He started to pace the small apartment. Care to share who you're hiding from? Shikaka set me up on a fucking arranged marriage meeting without telling me, and this is the only place I could think of where he wouldn't look for me. Naruto spat. Kakashi nodded understandingly, leaning a hip against his kitchen counter. I've had to dodge many of those. I thought he knew me better than that. Naruto huffed, stopping as he threw his arms up in frustration. He fucking knew what I say no. I know 16 is the age that sort of shit starts up, but not to me. He continued to try and control his breathing, trying to calm himself down. Though it might be considered an extreme reaction to something so commonplace, Naruto still felt a little sick. He didn't like the implications of what the whole process involved. He finally actually looked at Kakashi and noticed he was barefoot, only in his shinobi pants and sleeveless vest. His mask was firmly in place, but Naruto winced all the same. I'm sorry. You were probably busy or something. Naruto, I'm not nearly that interesting. Kakashi eye smiled and something loosened in Naruto's chest. He took a moment to look around. He'd never actually been to Kakashi's apartment before. The window he'd entered through was just to the right of the small kitchen shoved into the left corner, facing the front door. A few bookshelves and a gray couch were against the right wall, and there was very little decor. It was a lot more compact and functional than he'd expected. He spied a familiar plant through the open door to his left, and he gravitated towards it. His bedroom was small, too, with a desk against the right wall and a double bed against the left. A weapons chest sat behind the door. The wide window ledge had a few picture frames along it, and sitting in the middle was the plant Naruto had given Kakashi almost a year ago now. He felt the waxy leaves and smiled. It looked very well cared for. Mr. Uchi is still alive and well, Kakashi remarked from where he was leaning against the doorframe. You named him Mr. Uchi? Naruto couldn't help but ask, his smile growing at the thought of it. Kakashi looked away, but Naruto could swear there was a hint of pink poking out the top of his mask. You have little shuriken on your sheets. Naruto grinned as he sat on the edge of the bed. You're secretly soft, aren't you? Don't spread that around the village, Kakashi answered back, rolling his eye playfully. I have a reputation to uphold. Ah yes, the fearsome reputation of the Kapinin. Naruto saluted. I shall guard this secret with my life. A comfortable silence fell over them as Naruto leaned back onto his hands. He wasn't sure what Kakashi had done to dissipate his furies so quickly, but he was glad for it. He was sure it would rise back up when he left, but he appreciated the distraction. He sobered up. "Why don't people get that I don't need a relationship?" He asked quietly. "I'm not missing anything, and I don't think a romantic relationship is necessary for my happiness. Is that so bad and unnatural that people can't understand?" The bed dipped next to him after a few seconds. "I've been asking myself that same question for years," Kakashi quietly admitted, and Naruto's head snapped around. He knew the man had never really dated, at least not while Naruto had known him. He could have pursued something in the years they weren't speaking, but Naruto didn't like to assume. He knew the man toted around those porn books like a trophy, but he'd always doubted he read them for that reason. He was sure it was more for the shock factor or as misdirection. He softened, knocking his head against Kakashi's shoulder gently. "At least we understand each other, even if nobody else does." He tried to joke, but it came out more fond than anything. "Yeah." Another silence fell over them. "Hey, you know the Rasengan, right?" Kakashi tilted his head in question. "Yes." Naruto kicked off his sandals and pulled his legs up onto the bed, sitting cross-legged on the bed facing Kakashi. After a moment of prompting, Kakashi joined him, mirroring his position opposite him. "Ryo ran me through the steps, but I haven't really had a chance to practice." Naruto grinned. "Wanna help?" "With your chakra control, you won't need much help," Kakashi said, even as he raised a hand to perform the technique. The rest of the night spent on Naruto trying to master his father's technique, taking a short break for dinner at one point. The hours passed quickly, and Naruto was able to forget about the troubles waiting for him outside of these four walls, even for a short time. He would have to visit more often. Chapter 42. Auto Attack 2, Electric Boogaloo Ryo. He stopped and automatically turned towards a deep voice, his mood souring at the sight of Shikamaru's father standing there. "Sorry, I have to deliver these." He hefted the box further up his hip. "I don't have time to talk to you." Sakura and Ryo had been placed into a team of 2 since he'd returned, with Team 10 also forming a team of 2 as their Chunin counterparts remained in their new roles. They were limited to in-village D-ranks, but even almost 3 months after the attack, there was still plenty to do. They were also left mostly to their own devices as Kashi and Asuma-sensei were allocated to higher-ranked missions, so Ryo at least felt they weren't being treated like green genin. The desk trusted them to get stuff done on their own. He'd been able to avoid Shikaku since Nissan had been hospitalized. He just walked in a different direction or left the room whenever he saw him. It was blatant, but Shikaka hadn't tried to approach him, seeming to understand that Ryo wanted nothing to do with him. He knew Nissan was still close to him, but Ryo was willing to hold on to the resentment as long as possible. The man had known about Kazune and Nissan, and he'd kept it from Ryo. He wasn't about to suddenly forget that. Although Shikaku and Nissan hadn't seemed that close recently, something had happened at the end of last month, but Ryo couldn't even begin to guess what it was. While he was making an effort to talk to Nissan more and really listen, there were some topics Nissan liked to avoid completely, and Ryo had decided to respect that. What was important was that he got to know more about Nissan. It didn't matter what it was. That wasn't worth making Nissan uncomfortable. "Please, Ryo," Shikaku winced. "I know you and I are not on the best of terms, but I need your help." "Why should I help you?" Ryo finally put down the box, committing to the conversation for the moment. "You never helped me. You didn't even bother to tell me that Nissan and Kazune were in danger." "I promise you, Ryo, that was not what I wanted." Shikaka stepped forward intently. "I was going to come straight to you and Sasuke after my meeting with the Sandaime, but I was ordered not to. I didn't even want them on that mission." He'd never seen the man show this much emotion before. "You were ordered not to?" "I thought you deserved to know too, Ryo, but I couldn't go against Sandaime-sama's orders." "But Gigi wouldn't." He trailed off. Shikaka's dark eyes softened. He really believed he was doing the right thing. "Even if we didn't agree," he said. He believed that it was safer for Naruto for no one to know he was missing. If the other villages got wind of the fact that was being held against his will outside of the village, then they would have searched for him too. There would have been the risk of them finding him first, and it would have been even harder to get him back. But telling me wouldn't have made any difference. I can't tell you what Sandaime-sama was thinking. Shikaka shrugged. He then paused. I thought someone would have told you by now that we were all under orders. Ryo cringed slightly. Nisen told me, but I guess it didn't really sink in. Like, I know that, but that didn't make it hurt any less. Shikaka nodded in understanding. I'm sorry you were put through it all. It never should have happened. Ryo felt some of the resentment fade from his heart. He would still probably be a bit wary of Shikaka, but he couldn't really keep being mad at him like this anymore. Nisen had told him many times that it hadn't been Shikaka's fault. He supposed he could sort of see that now. He may not like him that much, but Shikaka clearly cared about Nisen. Shikamaru told him about the family dinners they had with Nisen. His mother was apparently close to trying to get him to move in. So, what do you want help with? Ryo crossed his arms. Is this because of what happened last month? Shikaka froze. He told you about that. No. Ryo shook his head, but I can tell something happened. Nisan's been off. He's also been impossible to track down. So I know he's hiding from someone. Kazune mentioned your name once, and Nisen flinched, so it had to be you. Shikaka's look of guilt was eerily similar to Shikamaru's. They almost looked like twins anyway down to the hairstyle, bar the 2 scars and goatee that Shikaka sported. Can you just ask him to talk to me? He asked neutrally, controlling his expression quickly. I've been looking for him every day for 2 weeks, and he's never at the office anymore. I know he's found other duties to complete, but he's also never home when I call round. Naruto could avoid me forever with his sensing. What do you want me to say? Tell him I'm stupid and I'm sorry and I'll never try anything like that again. Shikaka listed. Yoshino is worried about him, and so am I. I only wanted the best for him. I see him as a part of my family, but I didn't stop and think about his feelings. I will do better in the future. Not just with him, but Shikamaru and my clan too. Ryo considered him for a moment. I mean, I'll pass it on, but I don't know what he'll do. He gave in. Thank you, Ryo. Shikaka's shoulders slumped into a more familiar posture. That's all I can ask. Naruto flipped through his sealing notebook, making a note every few pages. He'd finally managed to finish the seals the hospital had asked for, and he'd had new ideas about how to improve them. With his evenings free due to Tsunade's new schedule for him, he would actually have time to try them out. He even had time to train in taijutsu and ninjutsu again. With the additional training, he probably had about the same amount of free time as before, which was none, which probably wasn't Tsunade's intention, but Naruto was happy with it. He'd forgotten how cathartic it was just to blow up a training ground. The small signature following him started to quicken his pace, so Naruto slowed down, waiting for him to catch up. The badly disguised rock shuffled forward and matched his pace once again. Once they reached a quieter section of the village, Naruto stopped and turned. The papier-mâché rock stopped after a second, and Naruto tried to muffle his laughter. Can I help you, Konohamaru-kun? The rock remained still and silent. Come on, kid. It was a good effort, but I know you're there. He wasn't sure why the Sandaime's grandson had decided to follow him around today. He knew he hadn't exactly been fair to the kid the last time they'd met. He'd been so overwhelmed with preparations for the Chunin exams that he hadn't been in the mood for an 8-year-old to accuse him of tripping him up. Konohamaru lifted the fake rock over his head, revealing his scowling face. He looked a bit like a Suma. His brown hair stuck straight up out of his face, and he still had the blue scarf and yellow t-shirt with Konoha's leaf on it. Deep brown eyes were narrowed as he flung out his hand to point at Naruto. How did you know I was there? He demanded. Naruto looked incredulously between the kid and the rock. Kid, rocks don't move on their own. They also don't adjust their speed when following someone. Konohamaru huffed. You think you're super smart, huh? Naruto shook his head, utterly baffled. No, the idea was solid. You just need to pick a better medium. It would have been maybe easier to use henge, or even disguise as a fence. If you got the hang of stopping before your target turns around, it would work much better. He didn't think Konohamaru had expected a lesson on sneaking up on people. The kid's hand wavered before he finally lowered it. Why are you telling me this? Why aren't you angry that I'm following you? Why would I be angry? Naruto asked in genuine confusion. You probably want to talk to me, but you're not sure how to do it. Also, how are you going to get better if people don't help you? You want to be Hokage someday, right? You have a long way to go, but if you keep improving, I can see it happening. Konohamaru's mouth opened and closed silently. Naruto wasn't sure what he'd said. He sobered up slightly. I'm sorry about your grandfather, he offered quietly. He was a great man and he loved you very much. Konohamaru frowned, looking down at the ground. He talked about you. Naruto blinked in surprise. The Sandaime talked about him? Why? They'd fallen out when Konohamaru was only 5. Why did the Sandaime talk about him? What did he say? He couldn't help but ask. He said you were strong and that you really cared about people. Konohamaru recited, his eyes misty in memory. Like you always stood up for people, no matter who they were, if you knew it was right, even against Aji-chan. Naruto was motionless, frozen in shock. He said that if I ever needed help that I should find you. Konohamaru finally looked at him, and that you would be a great Hokage someday. Naruto felt the tears well up, and he harshly wiped them away. Damn that old man. They disagreed on so much and he turned around and did this? They'd been so close before, but Naruto knew that they'd lost at the night of the Uchiha massacre. There had been minor conflicts since then, and Naruto thought that he and the Sandaime were done, reduced to a tense relationship as subordinate and leader. There was so much that the old man hid, stuff Naruto knew shouldn't be hidden. He'd make a great Hokage. What was that nonsense? That was Ryo's dream, not his. The tears kept coming, but Naruto did his best to stem them. He didn't need people to see him crying in the middle of the street. Gigi was gone. It shouldn't matter that he'd talked about him to his grandson, but somehow it did. Thanks for telling me, Konohamaru-kun. He forced a smile. You don't have to worry about fighting me for the hat, though. That'll be my little brother's job. Konohamaru just looked back at him with a serious expression. You call me by my name, he said out of the blue. That day, you told Ebisu-sensei to use it too. Naruto raised an eyebrow, his cheeks drying in the cold November air. What else are we supposed to call you? People never call me by name. It's always honorable grandson. People look at me and see him. They don't see me. You did, though. Konohamaru's eyes were intense. Naruto couldn't remember doing anything special that day. If anything, he thought he'd been too harsh on the kid. I think you're giving me too much credit. He held up his hands, his notebook falling open as it hung down in one hand. I just treated you like I would any other kid. Konohamaru geared up to say something else when his attention was captured by the pages of his notebook. What's that? This? Naruto stepped closer, dropping to one knee so he could allow Konoha a better view. These are seals. I'm working on some new ones, and this notebook is where I sketch out my ideas before I try them out on sealing paper. Konohamaru nodded, still captivated by the images. He pointed to one of the more complicated ones. What does this one do? That one will hopefully assist the diaphragm in patients with collapsed lungs, Naruto described eagerly. Essentially, you place it on their chest, and it helps create a vacuum that'll inflate the lungs when the muscles are too weak. He wasn't sure if Konohamaru totally understood, but there was a twinkle in his eye. I thought Fuinjutsu was supposed to be really hard. Naruto chuckled, handing over the notebook for the kid to hold, as he sat cross-legged in the middle of the path. Konohamaru mirrored him, plopping himself onto the ground. It involves a lot of reading, yeah, but the only important things you need to learn Fuinjutsu is patience and imagination. Konohamaru grinned, and Naruto pointed to another one. So this one... He didn't know how long they sat there, going through his sealing notebook, but it was nice to have someone as excited as he was. He left the kid with a promise to find him some beginner's Fuinjutsu scrolls to read. His relationship with the Sandaime may have been a bit rocky, but that didn't mean it had to be the same way with Konohamaru. Sasuke kicked a stone as he waited around a clearing just outside of the village walls. His teammate had gone for a piss somewhere in the trees, so Sasuke was left to listen to the quiet rustling of the leaves around them in the evening air. He didn't mind guard duty, even if it was dull, and he only had to put up with one other chunin at any given time. They did patrols in pairs, with 10 pairs operating at any given time, and there was a lot of ground to cover. He enjoyed the exercise, and his favorite route was this one, a few hundred meters away from the walls. It was peaceful, and Sasuke had the time to really think about his future and what he wanted out of it. He knew he would have to find something else. He couldn't do guard duty forever. He needed something that made him better as a shinobi. While he knew this was necessary for Konoha, he could help but think he would be better suited elsewhere. He was better than just running circles around the village, and he knew Naruto knew it too. Things had settled down from the invasion, so he hoped they would find something for him soon. He heard a loud rustle and he shifted his feet. Took the guy long enough. He frowned as someone he didn't recognize emerged from the foliage. "Uchiha Sasuke," the large man asked. "Who the fuck else it is supposed to be, Jiboro?" A girl appeared beside the man, crossing her arms. "Tayuya, that's not very ladylike," the man scolded softly. "You're going to make the wrong impression on Sasuke-kun." He scanned them, reaching for a kunai. The man was tall with ginger hair, forming a short mohawk on the top of his round head. He was on the bigger side, with broad shoulders and a gut being held back by a thick purple rope acting as a belt. Sasuke remembered seeing one like it on Orochimaru in the Forest of Death. The girl was much smaller and looked his age, dark pink hair covering most of her face. It was held in place with a black hat, the rim covered in white bandages, and she wore the same uniform as the man, beige tunic, purple rope belt, and black shorts. "Go fuck yourself, fatso," she retorted harshly. Now. The level hasn't even started yet. Another guy emerged, barely older than Sasuke. He was dark-skinned and spiky. Black hair was slicked back into a bushy ponytail. His tunic was sleeveless, and he was the only one wearing a hitayate. The music note immediately set Sasuke on the edge. "Shut the fuck up, Kodomaru," she snapped. "Where are those useless twins?" "They're on a side quest," Kodomaru shrugged. "Gotta make sure the sensing guy doesn't come and interrupt our fun." "What are you doing here?" Sasuke cut in tersely. "What does Orochimaru want with me?" "Orochimaru-sama has a wonderful deal to offer you," Jiboro said calmly. "If you come to Odo, you can attain limitless power, enough to beat your brother." "I refuse," Sasuke retorted almost instantly. "We'll just have to show you what you're missing then." The girl grinned widely. The three vanished from view and Sasuke activated his Sharingan in time to block a blow from Kodomaru aimed right at his face. He planted his hands on the back of his shoulders and shoved, pushing Kodomaru towards the ground. He used the momentum to lift both of his feet off the ground, kicking back at Tayuya as she came up behind them and sending her flying. Jiboro came running with a fist already swinging, and Sasuke had to think fast. He used his core to plant his feet back on the ground, deflecting the fist with his forearm as he grabbed the loop of Kodomaru's belt with his other hand. With a massive heave, he lifted Kodomaru and swung him into Jiboro, the pair tumbling away from him. He fell back into a ready stance as they turned into logs, and he searched the clearing, finally finding them standing and observing him. "Not bad," Jiboro stated thoughtfully. "No wonder Orochimaru wants you." Sasuke just snarled. Kodomaru launched himself forward and spat spider webs out of his mouth. "Keton, Gokaku no Jutsu." The ball of flames caught the webs and burned them to ash in an instant. It didn't slow down Kodomaru's approach, and Sasuke ducked beneath a fist, not expecting another to follow in its shadow. The blow landed on his cheek, and he used the momentum to spin into a roundhouse, getting some distance between them. Since when did the guy have 6 arms? He was shoulder-barged by Jiboro, and it sent him flying, tumbling towards a smirking Tayuya. He made himself turn an extra 2 rotations, so her hit missed as he ended up beneath her stomach. He flipped through hand seals and grabbed her ankles. Right on Bakurai. The lightning chakra lanced up his arms and into her legs, causing her to screech in pain. He held on tightly even as something slammed into his ribs. He wheezed as the pain radiated up his sides. He finally let go, but she continued screaming as her legs failed to hold her weight. He coughed again as Jaburo kicked his stomach. "Give up and come with us," he said. "You can be so much stronger than you are now. You are wasted in Konoha." He felt his foot being grabbed as cursed as Kadamaru swung him around. He tore a kunai from one of the pockets of his Chunin vest, swiping at the hand and managing to slice into the arteries in his wrist. Kadamaru let go with a roar, and Sasuke rolled to break his landing. He stood and faced the trio once again, grimly satisfied to see at least two of them injured. "I will never join Orochimaru," he spat defiantly. "You are going to have to drag my dead body out of this village because that's the only way it would ever happen." It wasn't even a question. The allure of power didn't have the slightest bit of sway on him. He knew he could become strong in Konoha. He'd already made so much progress, and he knew he would just continue to grow. Sure, they stuck him with shitty missions sometimes, and he usually wanted to be left alone, and he occasionally wanted to stab the villagers and fangirls out of frustration, but at the end of the day, it was his home. It was where Naruto and Kazuya and his team and his family history were. Betraying the village for power would make him no better than Itachi and would be an affront to his clan, one of the founders of this village. He wanted to rebuild the Uchiha clan, and a part of that was reestablishing the reputation and esteem they had before. He would not be the final nail in the coffin. He would stand tall and earn the respect of everyone, so when people spoke about the Uchiha clan, it was with awe and pride. He would defeat not only Itachi himself, but the shadow he had cast over his family. He would build a bright future with his own two hands. "Come on, there's nothing keeping you here," Kadamaru tried, having stemmed the blood flow from his wrist. Faces flashed through his head. Ryo and Kakashi and Kazuya and Tenten, and the dumbass he graduated with. Naruto's grinning face was the last, and he gripped his kunai tighter. The older boy had no idea what he'd done for Sasuke. Without him, Sasuke might have even been tempted by Orochimaru. He'd taken Sasuke in without question and supported him and was just there for him. He believed with every inch of his soul that Sasuke could beat Itachi and fulfill all his goals, and he fought so hard to find the truth about that night, all because he thought it was the right thing to do. Sasuke knew he wasn't a great person. He was angry and vindictive and grumpy and stubborn, and had no patience for people that frustrated him. Naruto showed him that it was okay, that even with all his faults they would never leave him. "My family is here," he stated firmly. "They're dumb and gullible and loud, but they're mine." No one could ever replace his parents or his clan, but the Uzumaki household had squirmed into his cold heart and settled there, making sure he knew that while he'd suffered a great loss, he wasn't alone. The memory of the Sea of Candles from the first Rinne festival after he'd lost his clan was still as bright and clear as the day it happened. "I'm glad to hear it," a very familiar voice said. Otherwise, this might have been a bit awkward. Sasuke watched Naruto emerge from the left of the clearing, grinning widely at him. Despite his joking tone, Sasuke could see the love and pride glittering in his soft blue eyes. There was a splatter of blood across his cheek, but Sasuke couldn't see a wound. There wasn't even a hair out of place. "Are the A and B on their way?" Sasuke quickly asked. "Nope." He shook his head as he came to stand beside Sasuke, hands in his pocket. "You and I can handle them." "Where's Sakan and Yukon?" Kadamaru demanded. Naruto appeared to think for a moment, and Sasuke didn't know how he was acting so nonchalantly. These guys were no joke. "You mean the twins?" Naruto's grin turned sharp. "I'm afraid they're unavailable for the foreseeable future. You might find pieces of them around a few hundred meters west of here, but the animals might have already got those." Taiyuya howled in fury as she finally got her legs to obey her after the electrical attack. Sasuke readied himself, but Naruto spoke quietly. "I'm going to send off a futon attack," he said quickly, already flashing through his one-handed seals. "I need you to hit it with a katan." Sasuke nodded as Naruto unleashed his technique. Futon, Kami-Orosure. Sasuke almost messed up a hand seal as he watched a massive wall of wind start to move towards their opponents. The thought that he'd never actually seen Naruto fight seriously flashed through his mind before he refocused. Kitan, Hibashiri. He had to take a step back at the blast of heat that flared as the techniques combined, inducing an incredible furnace that roiled and burned as it scorched the grass beneath it. Which one do you want? He looked over to Naruto. The one with 6 arms. He replied quickly. There was something about him that rubbed Sasuke the wrong way. Sounds good. Naruto cracked his knuckles. You've already weakened the girl, so I'll deal with her quickly, then take on the big one. The flames finally crashed into the trees behind the trio and spluttered out, the leaves still burning slowly. The Odo-nin had managed to dodge it, but not entirely. Jiboro was slapping out flames on his tunic, and Taiyu was struggling to stand on her own. Kadamura looked fine, with only ash streaked across his face and clothes. Naruto vanished from next to him and reappeared behind Taiyuya. It was only because of his Sharingan that he could see the futon coating Naruto's right hand as he swiped it across her throat, cutting her carotid artery and spraying her blood across the ground. Jiboro screamed in fury as he lunged for Naruto, and the Uzumaki dodged, leading him away from Kadamaru and Taiyuya's cooling body. Sasuke ran straight for Kadamaru, launching several shuriken. Kadamaru easily blocked it with his multiple limbs, but it drew his attention back to Sasuke. All you had to do was say yes, the Odo-nin hissed. We offered you more power than you could have ever dreamed of, and yet half of you are dead and we are just getting started. Sasuke grinned viciously. Sounds like I made the right decision. You haven't seen anything yet. Sasuke landed another hit, but it didn't seem to faze the Odo-nin. Black swirls spread over Kadamaru's skin until he was covered, and Sasuke jumped back. He bit into his thumb and flew through hand seals, slamming one of his many hands onto the ground. Kuchios no Jutsu. Dozens of spiders appeared and started slinging webs at Sasuke. He completed his own hand seals almost immediately after. Katan, Gokameshitsu. He heaved a great breath, and fire spilled from his lips in a torrent. He spun, creating a living tornado as the spiders burned up around him. He finally ran out of breath and stopped the technique, but the spiders were gone, leaving behind smoldering heaps. He didn't have a chance to dodge the kunai thrown his way and gritted his teeth as it sliced into his right arm. He didn't let that stop him from launching himself forward again, exchanging fists and kicks in a flurry. It was harder than he thought trying to fight all 6 hands at once, but he was just barely holding his own. Kadamaru landed a heavy kick into his side and sent Sasuke rolling. Looks like I'm going to have to get serious. Huh. Kadamaru's skin started to bubble and move, and was soon covered in a red light that fluctuated like molten lava. He grew in height and width, and when the light faded, Sasuke could only stare at what he'd become. He was demonic in appearance, with 2 horns sticking out of his head and a 3rd eye in his now uncovered forehead. His hair had turned white, and spikes stuck out of his shoulders and elbows, his skin a deep red. This is what you could have had. Uchiha. This is the power of the cursed seal. He secreted a yellow substance that hardened into projectiles, and Sasuke winced as one of them managed to hit his leg. He powered through the rising pain to flip through seals. Katan, Injiki. His fists lit up with bright orange flames, and he started swinging. Kadamaru didn't let him get close, and Sasuke was reduced to hitting the weird orange kunai away from him. He was beginning to tire, and Kadamaru showed no sign of the same. He had to finish this, but he couldn't get close enough between the extra arms and constant waves of kunai. A terrible idea came to him. He'd never tried using the technique directly on another person, but it should cause enough damage to down the Odo-nin. He ran straight for Kadamaru and didn't dodge the large kunai that lodged into his shoulder. Kadamaru was surprised for only a split second, scrambling back, but Sasuke was already slamming his hands on the other boy's chest. Right on Jibashi. The lightning tore through Kadamaru's body, followed by an excruciating scream. Blood sprayed into Sasuke's face as the technique ripped his skin apart. He could see the muscle ripping apart in the open wounds, and one of his eyes burst out of his socket. The scream was cut off abruptly, and Sasuke canceled the technique, standing back and sucking air desperately into his deprived lungs. Kadamaru had reverted to his original form. His chest wasn't moving from what he could tell, to the blood and torn chunks of flesh. Sasuke took a moment to check the Oto-nin was actually dead before he immediately looked over at Naruto. The earth around the pair was wrecked. Craters and debris were scattered about at random, and Sasuke could see deep, clean slices in the ground from futon jutsu. His mouth opened as a massive, heavy-altered Jiboro pulled a massive sphere out of the ground, flinging it at Naruto, who proceeded to bend over backwards to avoid it. He fell into a back handspring and, when upright, ran straight for Jiboro. Sasuke was captivated as he watched the pair exchange blows. Naruto looked like one of the festival dancers. His movements were so fluid and smooth and effortless. Gravity didn't look like it affected him as he kicked and twirled around a man twice his size. One hit from Jiboro would be enough to kill him, but it was like Naruto was made of air, each punch seeming to pass through him. How fast did he have to be to do that? How flexible? How many hours did he spend training? So this was Red Leg. He'd seen it in training, but it was a different story in a real fight. Naruto was a different story in a fight. Jiboro was slowly being cut up, small wounds appearing with each blow. Sasuke reactivated the Sharingan, which had faded after he'd checked Kadamaru was dead, and was able to see the thin blanket of futon chakra coating Naruto's legs. The hits alone were powerful, but combined like that, Sasuke hadn't seen anything like it. He was already trying to think of ways he could do it himself with his elements. Naruto flipped back several paces to avoid the hammer of earth that slammed into the ground where he'd stood. He grinned as he stood up straight, shoving his left hand into his pocket and relaxing. What was he doing? Jiboro was still standing. The fight wasn't over. "You really are a big fucker," Naruto said calmly. "Took a few more than I thought it would." "A few more of what?" "You arrogant—" Jiboro began, but he froze halfway through. His eyes rolled back into his skull, and he dropped like a stone, his altered form fading just like it did with Kadamaru. Sasuke limped over, holding his arm and dripping blood into the wrecked ground. He finally came close enough to see the small seals covering Jiboro's body. "Each of those injects a bit of poison into his system," Naruto explained, seeing his curiosity. "He's a big guy, so it took way longer to hit him than it usually would. Kanzuya helped me make them last week, and I haven't had the chance to test them yet." Sasuke swallowed. Naruto was a little rumpled, but his bun was still perfectly in place. The blood on his cheek was the only tangible evidence that he'd even been in a fight. Sasuke, on the other hand, was covered from head to toe in a mixture of his and Kadamaru's blood, with cuts and bruises littering his whole body. He was exhausted from all the chakra use, and Naruto looked exactly the same as he had when he first appeared. He had so much further to go to match his level. Had he even taken the fight seriously? He'd used it as an opportunity to test a seal, while it had taken every bit of skill Sasuke had to beat Kadamaru. He'd been right to stay. If Naruto could get this strong in Konoha, so could Sasuke. He'd have to rope the redhead into his training more often. "Why didn't you get back up?" he asked abruptly, the edges of his vision becoming fuzzy. "This was your fight," Naruto shrugged. "I just helped even the odds a bit. 3-1 is a bit much, even for me." Sasuke nodded, but the dizziness hit him full force. He felt himself being caught by a pair of warm arms just before he blacked out. Sasuke groaned as awareness slowly came back to him. His limbs felt so heavy, and as he swallowed a sharp, dry pain informed him of how thirsty he was. He peeled his eyes open and hissed at the bright, white light. "Gods!" His head hurt. "Sasuke!" He opened his eyes more slowly this time to Naruto leaning over him, a glass of water in his hand. He offered the straw to Sasuke, and he drank it greedily, the cold, soothing liquid coating his throat and easing the scratchy feeling. Naruto took away the empty glass and sat back in his chair beside Sasuke's bed. "How long?" he croaked. "Just an hour or so," Naruto smiled softly. "It was the chakra exhaustion that got you." He nodded as Naruto continued. They were identified as the Sound Four. Orochimaru sent them to kidnap you, so we can safely assume he's not going to give up on having you for himself. A shudder ran through Sasuke. He didn't want to think about what the snake Sannin wanted him for. I need to get stronger, he said, so I can stop anyone who tries. I agree. Naruto leaned forward, clasping his hands in front of him. I've been thinking about you a lot, he began. You're already an amazing chunin, and ideally you would be handling B ranks outside of the village. The issues with sound complicate this, however, and I can in good conscience send you out of the village when I know these people are going to be hunting you. Sasuke gritted his teeth. They couldn't trap him here. But if you were to wear a disguise or were completely anonymous, Naruto continued, interrupting Sasuke's negative spiral, then there would be very little risk considering no one would know if you left the village or not. Where was he going with this? I think you should apply to become an AMBU. Sasuke's heart skipped a beat. Umbu? But He whispered. Itachi had been an AMBU. Sasuke, you held off 3 Jounin-level enemy Nin long enough for help to arrive, Naruto explained patiently. You defeated a Jounin-level shinobi despite only being a chunin for just over 3 months. You have an incredible level of mastery over so many katan and Raiden jutsu, and your taijutsu is powerful. It's a waste to have you on guard duty, and AMBU will help you become stronger. It is also strictly confidential, so no one would know what missions you were on or if you were out of the village bar a select trusted few. Sasuke didn't respond, still trying to process Naruto's words. The entry requirements aren't as strict as people like to imagine, he said, continuing to blow Sasuke's mind. You have to be a chunin, and a current or former AMBU has to vouch for you. I've never been one, but I know the AMBU commander pretty well, so I could get you in, or we could find someone that would vouch for you. What do you think? Sasuke was delighted. This was exactly the kind of thing that he wanted. AMBU would be a massive challenge, and he would get to complete missions that would actually test his skills. AMBU were the strongest in the village right after the Hokage and Elite Jounin, and while he wasn't sure he was at that level yet, what better way to get there than training alongside them? I want to, he nodded. I'll vouch for him. Kakashi-sensei walked into the room, eyes smiling with his hands in his pockets. It's the least I can do for my cute little Kohai. The others are on their way. Sasuke felt a smile forming across his face, but didn't try to stop it. Hey! Naruto waggled a finger playfully. We can just get you to the starting line. The hard part of AMBU is the boot camps and exams that decide if you can stay. It takes about a year of training to get your mask. Are you ready for that? Sasuke didn't even hesitate. Yes. Naruto rooted through his office shelf, cursing himself for his hoarding habits. Why did he insist on keeping every single piece of paper and scroll that had even the tiniest relevance to his job? It looked great, but at times like this it was like searching for a specific kunai in a practice range. He felt the signature hover outside his door, but he decided not to run. He'd been avoiding the man long enough. If even Ryo had said something, then Naruto should give him the chance. Naruto? He didn't turn around and look. I'm sorry, kid. Naruto just continued to look through the next piles of scrolls. I was thinking about what was best for both you and the clan, but I got it wrong. It sounded painful for the Nara to say those words. Sometimes I get too focused on the logic and strategy part of things that I don't factor in the human element. It works out so great in my head that the world should follow that same conclusion. It works in battle, but not so much in relationships. Naruto finally stopped moving, turning slowly to look at the man. Shikaka stood straight and stared him directly in the eye. Naruto could respect that. I thought you knew me better than this, he said quietly. I do, Shikaka said desperately. Kid, I fucked up. I know that. I just thought that you should have the chance to see what you were missing. I didn't want you to deny yourself the opportunity for new things, because you're too busy trying to protect people from hurting. Naruto knew he did do that, but not with this. Shikaka, I don't deny myself a relationship because I don't want them to have to attend my funeral. I just don't want one. I don't want sex or dates or any of it. It doesn't make me less worthy, and my happiness doesn't depend on someone loving me like that. I have so many people who love me just for who I am, and that's all I could ever need. My platonic bonds are more than enough, and if you can't respect that, then fuck off. Gods, things have been so much easier when he was younger. No one asked about this type of shit because they'd assumed he'd grow into it. He didn't know what happened when he'd turned 16, and everyone decided that it was time for him to date, but after a month it got old real fast. I'm so sorry, kid, Shikaka said quietly. I thought you were trying to do that protect people from your imminent death thing you always do. I won't deny that I do that. Something softened in Naruto's chest. Just not with this. Shikaka nodded. I vow on my position as the Nara clan head and Jounin commander of Kanagakur that I will never betray your trust like this again. Shikaka said seriously. The Nara clan will have your back for as long as you need us. Naruto appreciated the sentiment and the gravitas behind his words. No need to get all dramatic, he joked, letting the man know it was okay. Shikaku relaxed, and the laziness covered him like a cloak. Naruto thought it suited him much better than the tense and rigid posture he'd been sporting before. Besides, I can survive without you. Naruto crossed his arms. I even passed my post-kidnapping evaluation last week. Shikaku eyed him suspiciously. How much did you lie about? Irrelevant. Shikaku appeared to let it go for the moment, not wishing to push his luck. It might take a bit of time for them to fully relax back into the friendship from before, but Naruto knew they'd be fine. Naruto slid into the bar stool next to Genma-sensei. The Jounin had been a bit off for a while after that night, but 2 weeks later, he'd turned up with a bucket of instant ramen and demanded that Naruto stop avoiding him. Naruto had already forgiven him. He knew it wasn't totally fair on them either. There was no happy solution to his situation, and whether he hit it or didn't, people got hurt. He knew how much it had to hurt to know Naruto was hiding such a massive part of his life from them, but at the same time, it was just a hide. He stood by every word he'd said to them that night. He just wanted people to live their lives as happily as they could, and he knew that revealing his illness would take that away from them. Bearing their anger was worth their futures. I know I promised to treat you to a Chirakas, but it's going to be 1 or 2 bowls, right? Genma-sensei only partially joked. You underestimate how much ramen I can shove down my throat before I need to be stopped. Naruto grinned back at him, already ordering 2 miso ramen from Itachi. He was having a great day today. Maybe he should have started taking medication sooner. He couldn't remember the last time his appetite had been so big. It was relative, though. He was still nowhere close to the likes of his kids, but he would take each victory as it came. I was your Jounin sensei. Genma-sensei shook his head, chuckling. I've seen exactly how much you can pack away. He hesitated for a moment. So you're feeling good today? He really had to start getting used to this. Every time Genma-sensei saw him, there was a layer of meaning to his questions that hadn't been there before. I'm really good, Genma-sensei, he nodded, thanking Itachi as his first bowl was placed in front of him. Honestly, you just caught me on a bad day. Tsunade has been helping a lot. I'm glad. A comfortable silence fell over them as they started to dig in. He was glad Genma-sensei was so understanding. He hadn't seen Hana since that night. It hurt so much to know that he may have lost one of his oldest friends, but he was determined to let her work through it on her own. He'd said his piece and given his reasons. It was a matter of whether she could accept them or not. He felt her signature start to move towards him, and he paused, his chopsticks hovering in the air. She was heading directly for them. Naruto? He jumped at Genma-sensei's voice. Are you okay? Yeah, He felt her signature continue to move steadily towards the ramen stand. I thought I felt something. He turned in his seat to see the Inuzuka heir appear in the distance. He prayed she wasn't about to have a public throw down with him. There were too many people around who might hear the wrong thing. He waited until she was right in front of him, and he scanned her carefully. She looked awful. Her long brown hair was tied sloppily, strands escaping everywhere, and the bags beneath her eyes showed that she probably hadn't slept in the past month. Her Chunin vest was crumpled and stained, and her brown eyes were rimmed with red. "Hana, are you okay?" Naruto jumped out of his seat, dismissing the lingering, conflicted feelings from their argument in favor of worrying for his teammate. "What happened? Is everyone okay?" His hands hovered worriedly over her as he tried to figure out what was wrong. It couldn't be about him. It had been so long, and he could feel the pain seeping out of her every pore. She couldn't have been in this state for the past month. She swallowed, sniffling, before she wrapped her arms around him and pulled him tightly into her chest. Naruto could only freeze in shock as Gemma-sensei stood behind them, watching the pair warily. "I'm so sorry, Naruto-chan," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." She pulled back a little, looking into Naruto's eyes. "You're going through this awful thing, and I made it all about me," she croaked. "I just wasted a whole month of the time you have left being selfish and petty, and I'm really sorry." "Hey, no." Naruto pulled her back into a hug. "I had something big from you, and you had every right to be mad. I'm just sorry you had to find out that way. Stop being so nice and understanding." Hana pulled back sharply. "I hurt you. I know I did. And you shouldn't just be sweeping it all under the rug like it never happened. You've always been too forgiving of people." Naruto just gently smiled, holding her shoulders firmly. "Hana, how could I be mad at someone who is hurting so badly on my behalf?" Hana shook her head weakly. "I'm an Inuzuka," she argued feebly. "We're supposed to be the most loyal clan in Konoha, and yet I turned around and ran when you needed me. That isn't okay." He finally let go and just rested a hand on her head gently. "Then do better for the next time someone else needs you," he said softly. "Beating yourself up over the past isn't going to help you make a better future. Accept the lesson and let it go. Then you can change things for the better without all that dead weight holding you back." She nodded, wiping the tears off her cheeks. She nudged his arm with a small smile, and Naruto was glad to see it. It was a good start. "You sound like one of those old men whose quotes we had to learn at the academy." Naruto pulled an affronted look, prompting a chuckle out of the Inuzuka. "She's got a point." He felt Gemma-sensei mess with his braid. "You'd make a pretty good Jounin-sensei. You guys do remember I'm the youngest of all of you." He rolled his eyes, internally wincing as Hana's smile fell. He turned back to the counter. "Can we get a beef ramen, Tucci?" The man had been politely pretending he couldn't hear them, and Naruto was grateful. He didn't think there was anything too incriminating said, but he was glad to escape the attention. "Consider it on the house." Tucci winked, and Naruto smiled in thanks. He guided Hana to sit next to them. His smile grew as the signature he'd felt approaching finally arrived. "Meeting without me? I didn't think I could feel so betrayed." Gemma-sensei and Hana both jumped, and Naruto laughed, glancing over his shoulder to see Kinzu with his hands on his hips. He could see the relief on his face when his eyes landed on Hana, but he didn't dwell on it, quickly seating himself right beside her. "I swear one day we're going to make you jump." Kinzu peered around her to glare at Naruto playfully. "We're going to sneak up on you, and you're going to shit yourself." Naruto rolled his eyes. "Let me know how that goes." They relaxed into more casual conversation, chatting about what they'd been up to. Kinzuya started gesturing wildly as he talked about his progress at the academy, and Naruto felt the warm glow in his chest. His team was back together where they should be, and he knew they were going to be stronger than ever. It would take work, but the future really did look a bit brighter. Chapter 43. The end of one chapter is the beginning of another. Kakashi hopped in the open window, careful to avoid the plants beneath the window. Kinzuya could be extremely protective over them, and he had no desire to provoke the man. He took in the quiet and empty flat. He didn't see Naruto. He'd asked Kakashi to meet him here to talk, but hadn't mentioned what it was about. The scent of cold ginger tea tickled his nose along with stale bread. There was only one bite taken out of the piece of toast as it rested pitifully on a plate on the kitchen table. He heard a sound and watched Naruto emerge from his room, wrapped in a fluffy, blue blanket that was looking a bit threadbare with age. His hair was down and frizzy, and he smelled nervous. Kakashi cocked his head, What could he possibly be nervous about? It was just him. Thanks for coming. Naruto smiled weakly as he gestured Kakashi towards the couch. Of course. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. Are you okay? He sank into the well-worn couch as Naruto sat beside him a bit more timidly. He wouldn't look at him for more than a few seconds at a time, and Kakashi did not like it. There was something going on here, and nothing pointed towards it being good. Kakashi, you know I trust you, right? He really did not like the sound of that. You know I would never hurt you or hide something unless I had a really good reason, right? Naruto, what's going on? Naruto curled further into his blanket. I wanted you to hear it from me, he said quickly, his breathing increasing with every word. I mean, not that I'm going to tell anyone else, but Gemma-sensei and Hana found out. So that's already like double than who knew before. And I kind of feel like I'm losing control of everything, and I really don't want that, and... Naruto, Kakashi reached out to place a hand gently on Naruto's blanket-covered knee, trying to ground him a bit. Naruto nodded as he managed his breathing, going quiet for several minutes. He didn't know what had him so riled up, but he hated to see Naruto in distress. You don't have to tell me. You know that, right? No, I want to... Naruto shook his head. I want you to know. I don't want you to find out one day and never talk to me again. I can't tell anyone else. I can live knowing Ryo and Sasuke might hate me because I'm doing this for their futures, but you've already been through so much and I've thought about this a lot, and I don't want to just drop dead on you one day without a word. Drop dead. Kakashi's hand tightened on Naruto's knee. Drop dead. Naruto sucked a deep breath in and held it for a second, finally nodding. Do you remember the training accident I had as an academy student? Kakashi frowned. It had been around Naruto's second or third year in the academy. He'd heard about him landing in the hospital for a few weeks from Guy, but he'd been out on a mission at the time. By the time he'd returned to Konoha, Naruto had been discharged, and he'd heard nothing more about it. It's the reason you had to get the chakra blocked in your arm, Kakashi replied, not quite knowing where this was going. You re-injured your left arm, and the chakra network was unsalvageable, so they sealed it off to preserve the physical function. Naruto nodded, seeming to calm down the more they talked. That's most of the story, he said quietly. What no one knows is that it was a lot worse than just losing the ability to use my left hand in jutsu and seals. He felt Naruto's hand rest on his, and he turned his around so he could grasp it tightly. There was something about that physical contact that settled him. The warmth and coarseness of Naruto's hand kept him grounded. Yeah, remnants of the Kyuubi's chakra were released from where it was trapped in my arm, and it spread to my chest and abdomen. More specifically, my organs, he continued. Nothing happened right away. I was 13 when the first signs started showing up. Naruto, it was minor at first, you know. Naruto pushed on, as if he was just trying to get all out before he lost his nerve. I got more colds and bugs than normal, and then one day, I coughed a little blood. There wasn't any reason to say anything because it was a one-time thing. I didn't want to worry people. It wasn't just a one-time thing, though, and it got worse, much worse. He wiped the tears at the edge of his vision away roughly. Sorry, I should be immune to this shit by now. Anyway, yeah, I have a bunch of, symptoms and stuff, but Tsunade's helping me to control them. She says that while they're not going to go away, that I can still manage them well, and I've been doing much better. I started meds over 2 months ago, and it's like I'm back to 3 years ago. I still get rough days, but I really am okay. Kakashi processed his words. He felt numb. He didn't know how he was supposed to respond to something like this. How long? He heard himself ask, but it was like it was someone else's voice. I won't make 25. It was like a knife cutting Kakashi's heart out of his chest. He tried to pull his hand away, but Naruto gripped it tighter, the blanket falling off his shoulders. Kakashi, please. I'm sorry I kept this from you. His blue eyes were desperate. You're only the second person I've told, but I couldn't keep it from you anymore. I'm improving, but it won't last forever. I didn't want to leave you like your team did. I know it doesn't make it better, but I still have years left, and I don't want to lie to you. I will lie until my dying breath to everyone else, but not you. Kakashi, stop trying to pull away. Something had developed between them in recent months. He didn't exactly know what to call it. He'd always held himself apart from other people, purposely holding himself back from making connections because he knew people would expect things from him that he couldn't give. His Aika was a good deterrent, but there was still the occasional shinobi or kunoichi that tried their luck. He knew he couldn't commit to them in the way they wanted, so he just avoided them all. Naruto understood. He was in the same position. They hadn't exactly had the most linear relationship, from tolerance to absence to earning trust to sharing fears to fucking up to finding comfort. He and Naruto had been through a lot. It had been a long road to get to where they were now. Friendship was the closest that Kakashi could think of, even if it was slightly deeper than that since that day in the hospital. He didn't want to lose what they'd spent over a decade building together. Naruto was showing him a level of trust Kakashi didn't think he deserved. He'd kept this secret for a decade now, and could have continued without Kakashi being any the wiser. He hadn't even known to look before today. While he was still reeling at how much had been hidden from him, he couldn't take that out on Naruto. He couldn't make Naruto think he'd made the wrong decision to trust him. He might never depend on Kakashi again. Who else knows? I told Kanzuya when it happened. Naruto answered quickly, hope beginning to spark in his eyes. Tsunade, Shikaku, Hana, and Genma-sensei found out outside of my control. That's it. Kakashi frowned. Just 5 people know? Well, Tsunade, Hana, and Genma-sensei found out recently, and Shikaku found out 4 years ago. Naruto grinned weakly. So Naruto had been carrying this burden practically alone all this time? Kanzuya would have been there for him, but they were both just kids back then. He was probably thinking that he was protecting everyone by hiding it. Kakashi would do the same, and he hated it. He hated that he understood what Naruto was doing, because the Uzumaki deserved better than this, yet Kakashi couldn't argue with him. How many nights had he spent suffering alone with this? You're impossible, you know that? Naruto didn't have time to reply before Kakashi let go of his hand and pulled him into his chest. Naruto froze for a long moment before he melted into Kakashi's arms. The fluffy blanket was soft, and Naruto's warmth sank into Kakashi's chest. I'm sorry that you felt like you had to go through this alone. Naruto chuckled wetly. I'm sorry for putting this on you. I know this is kind of a burden. Kakashi squeezed so he would stop talking. I want to help you carry it, he whispered into Red Hair. You can depend on me until the very end. I won't leave you. He wouldn't run away. He'd run from this family before, and he'd promised to never do it again. The mixed feelings still swirled in his chest, but he shoved them aside to sort through later. Naruto was more important right now. He wouldn't fail him again. They still had years left, and Kakashi wouldn't waste them being angry and bitter. He'd wasted the years before he'd lost Obito and Rin and Minato-sensei, and he wouldn't allow himself to do that with Naruto. Thanks for not yelling at me. His voice was small, and Kakashi rested his masked face on Naruto's head, his heart aching at the implication of those words. Thank you for trusting me. Naruto opened his apartment door, crossing his arms as he looked at Jiraiya unimpressed. Can we help you? I need to talk to you about Ryo, the Sannin said firmly. Naruto spent a long moment just looking at the man, and when he finally saw the signs of discomfort, he stepped aside. As long as Jiraiya knew, he was at a disadvantage here. The man kicked off his get of sandals and shoved them neatly to one side, and Naruto followed him further into the apartment. Kanzuya looked up from the book he was reading. Sasuke was out finalizing his AMBU application with Kakashi, and Sakura was with Ino in one of the training grounds. Ryo was at the Inazuka compound training with Kiba. Jiraiya? Kanzuya placed his book on the coffee table. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you both about Ryo, he replied, standing next to one of the bookcases. It's about the group wearing red clouds. Naruto frowned as he stood behind the sofa Kanzuya was seated on. Red clouds. The image of Itachi and the Kiri missing Nin flashed across Naruto's mind. He knew they'd been after Rio, but no one he'd spoken to had known why. There wasn't much known in Konoha about people who wore that cloak, although he'd heard rumors that they were mercenaries. The group is called Akatsuki, Jiraiya began gravely. They're a group of missing nin after the tailed beasts. We don't know why yet or what their plans are, but they're going to come back for Rio. He's not safe in Konoha. Surely, he's safer here than anywhere else. Kanzuya pointed out. He has the whole village to fight them off, and Naruto will be able to sense them coming, so they can't exactly surprise us. Kanzuya had a point, but there was more to this. Naruto knew Jiraiya had already considered these points, so there had to be something else. He knew something they didn't. This organization, there's 10 of them, he said grimly. Every single of them is S-rank. Even Konoha would struggle if they all attacked at once. Naruto cursed silently. They could win against a team like that, but not without significant casualties. Not even advance warning could be enough against people with that level of power. But Kanzuya was right. Having Rio outside of the village wouldn't be practical either. It would make him an easier target with much less protection. And what do you propose to do about that? He asked with a neutral tone, ignoring Kanzuya's confused look. I could take the kid on a training trip, Jiraiya suggested. If we keep moving, then Akatsuki will turn their eyes away from Konoha, and we already know from when we went to find Tsunade that I'm a deterrent for them. He would be safe with me. Naruto scanned the Sannin's signature carefully. It fluctuated slightly, and he narrowed his eyes. And the real reason you want to train him. Jiraiya wasn't quick enough to hide the surprise that crossed his face. His features hardened into a determined grimace. I want the kid to learn how to use the Kyuubi's chakra. Fuck no. Kanzuya shot to his feet. That's not even an option. Minato designed that seal so he could do it safely, Jiraiya argued. The Suna Jinchuriki and the Kumo girl can do it with ease. It's a waste not to utilize that kind of chakra resource. That monster killed my mom. Kanzuya spat. It killed Naruto and Ryo's parents and Irika's parents and hundreds of other people, and it destroyed the lives of hundreds more. It should have died that night. It's bad enough it's sealed into that kid, but you want him to use that chakra? The chakra that's killing Naruto. Naruto knew that Kanzuya still had strong feelings towards the Kyuubi. He'd separated Ryo and the demon in his head, so that hatred didn't affect his relationship with Ryo, but the hurt from that night hadn't completely healed over even 13 years later. He knew it was the same for most of the village. The Kyuubi had caused a lot of damage, and even Naruto still felt the absence of his parents from time to time. And what if this group comes after Ryo in the future? Jiraiya argued hotly. Regular jutsu and training won't be enough to protect him. Learning to use the Kyuubi's chakra is the best chance he has of protecting himself. What if the Kyuubi decides to use him instead? What if it escapes? Kanzuya's tone was still full of anger, but Naruto could see the spark of fear in his eyes. Minato's seal won't let that happen. You can't know that for sure. Naruto remained silent, thinking over Jiraiya's words. He may not be on the best of terms with the man, but he couldn't dismiss him out of hand either. He looked over his father's seal himself, and Jiraiya was right. The Kyuubi couldn't get out on its own. Ryo would have to unlock the seal himself, and he knew better than do something dumb like that. He considered the Kyuubi itself. It had caused a lot of hurt and pain, but there was something about it that made Naruto hesitate to call it a monster. He knew it had been trapped inside his mother for years, and then Ryo for over a decade now, and he couldn't help but think about how it must feel to be caged like that. He knew they had sentience. Shikaku had shown him that in their fight in Suna. He also knew they were dangerous, and to have them free would pose an incredible risk to both Konoha and the other villages. He paused at that thought. That wasn't always necessarily true. He had heard about the release of the Sanbai after the death of the fourth Nezukichi, and so far there had been no reports of the beast attacking or wreaking havoc. Maybe the Kyuubi had attacked them in revenge for spending so many years locked up against its will. It wasn't a great arrangement for the container either. Jinchuriki meant power of human sacrifice, so while the villages prospered from it, the humans chosen didn't. Naruto himself had dealt with the rage, and pain directed at Ryo when they were younger just for containing the beast. He wondered if anyone had thought about the Kyuubi as its own being, rather than a demon intent on just destroying everything in its path. Enough! He didn't shout or yell, but that one word was enough to stop Kanzuya and Jiraiya in the middle of their spat as they turned towards him. Kanzuya, I think Ryo needs to do this. He held up a hand to stop Kanzuya's retort. No, listen to me. He looked over at Jiraiya. You have a point, but I think you're doing it for the wrong reasons, he stated plainly. If you're going to do this, then nobody can know where Ryo is, okay? You need to keep moving and use disguises and take every precaution. Jiraiya opened his mouth to speak, but Naruto cut him off. I also don't want you to only focus on the Kyuubi. There's a lot more he needs to learn. Ninjutsu, taijutsu, genjutsu. He needs to improve as a whole. The Kyuubi should be a part of his training, but not the main objective. You're seriously agreeing to this? Kanzuya asked, outraged. You are going to let Ryo out of the village with only this guy as protection? You don't even like him. True. He watched Jiraiya flinch. But I want what's best for Ryo, and that means ignoring my personal biases. Keeping on the move is going to be a lot safer than just waiting around like a sitting duck for the Akatsuki to target him. Jiraiya also has a point about using the Kyuubi's chakra. I've seen how Gaara and Yujito use theirs, and Ryo will be safer if he masters it. He took a deep breath. Since Ryo came back from looking for Tsunade, all he's been talking about is his time outside the village. He continued calmly. He loved it. The new sights and cultures and festivals and people. He won't say anything, but I know he wants to head straight back out there and forge his own path. This is a way for him to do that, no matter how we may feel about it. Kanzuya swore as he flung himself back onto the couch. Fine. He flung his hands up in surrender. I am stating for the record that I do not support this, and it's a terrible idea. Naruto waited. I won't stop you, though, he finally grumbled, crossing his arms petulantly. Jiraiya clapped his hands together, grinning widely. That's great, so... Hold on. Naruto held a hand up. You also need to ask Ryo. We can't just assume his decision, and this is his life. It will be his choice at the end of the day. Jiraiya nodded seriously. Thank you. Don't thank me. Naruto rolled his eyes. This is about Ryo. I haven't changed my mind about you, but I am willing to work with you for his sake. Jiraiya deflated slightly, but nodded again. I won't let you down. You do, and the Akatsuki will be the least of your worries. Ryo loitered around the edge of the training ground, pacing back and forth as he tried to build up the courage to enter. This had seemed like such a good idea when he'd made the decision 10 minutes ago, but now he felt the nerves swirling in his gut, and his palms were sweaty. And was he going to vomit? No, he couldn't do that. She'd hear him, and... Ryo-kun? He jumped several feet like a startled cat as he spun, eyes wide. Hinata, he grinned nervously, scratching the back of his neck. How are you? She smiled gently at him, and Ryo felt his heart skip a beat. She was so pretty. Her navy blue hair was short, with strands framing her kind, heart-shaped face. It complemented the soft lavender of her eyes, and she looked so cute in her slightly too big, fluffy, beige jacket. He wiped his hands on his jumper discreetly, but that didn't help. I'm fine. She glanced away from him, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. And you? Yeah, I'm great. Silence fell over them, and Ryo internally groaned. Why couldn't he just talk to her like he did everyone else? Is everything okay? She asked hesitantly. Yeah, he grinned. Yeah, I'm going to leave Konoha at the end of the month on a training trip with Jiraiya. It's going to be really cool. I'm going to learn so much and see loads of new places and come back so strong. Hinata smiled, but Ryo could tell there was something up. How long will you be gone? Jiraiya said like 2 years give or take a few months, he replied. He took a deep breath. He came here for a reason. He had to tell her. He couldn't leave without knowing. Hinata? He began, forcing himself to look directly into her eyes. Hinata, I really like you. I know I'm about to leave, but I know I'm still going to like you in 3 years. So what I'm really trying to ask is if you'll go on a date with me? When I come back, wide-eyed, she just stared back at him. Rio didn't know what to do, so he just kept talking. I've always really liked you, you know? Back in the academy, you were the strongest girl, and you were always so nice to me, and you're super smart. Then even after we graduated, you are such a good person, and so nice, and so pretty, and you could kick everyone's ass if you believe in yourself a bit more, and I love how you collect flowers and stuff, and... He finally cut himself off, his cheeks hot. He knew he probably looked like a tomato right now. He'd spilled way too much, and oh no, she was going to think he was weird and a total stalker, and what if she never spoke to him again? He froze, fighting the instinct to flee. He should have just left this until after he came back. Sure, she probably would have found someone much better than him while he was gone, because who wouldn't want to be with Hinata? But now, as he stood here waiting for her answer, a part of him thought that might have been the better option. It would have crushed him to see her with someone else, but he could have handled it. It was her choice at the end of the day. She mumbled something and his heart stopped. "I'm sorry," he said faintly. "I couldn't hear you. I like you too," she whispered, and Rio didn't know it was possible to feel so much joy and relief in one instant. She liked him back. She really liked him back. Why hadn't he done this earlier? Oh my gods, really? He breathed out. That's amazing, great, yeah. He paused. So, is this a yes? Hinata nodded, her small smile growing. Rio could count on his hands how many times he'd seen her smile this wide, and it was because of him. He wanted her to smile like that every day. "I'll wait for you," she said, her voice a bit louder. "I'll wait as long as it takes. I'll come back for you and take you on the best date you'll ever have." Rio grinned brightly. "I promise, Hinata. I'll do my best for you. I know you will." Hinata nodded. "You always keep your promises. It's your ninja way, right?" Rio grinned. He'd inherited it from Nissan and tried to adopt it in all parts of his life. This was no different. "Yeah, it is." Naruto hopped lightly up the rocks until he came to the peak, the soft lights of Konoha illuminating the dull evening sky. He took a moment to appreciate the sight below him before he continued to his destination. "This seems familiar." Kakashi's head snapped round in surprise. Naruto smiled as he sat himself down next to him, pressing his shoulder against Kakashi's arm. He felt the warmth seep into his muscles and sighed happily. They may live in the land of fire, but winter was no joke. "The kids are looking for you," he continued. "Any particular reason you're hiding from them?" Naruto, why do you assume I'm hiding?" Kakashi replied lightly. "Maybe I just wanted to enjoy the view and lost track of time." Naruto just silently waited. "The end of the month is almost here." Naruto nodded. "And you're about to lose your team to other teachers," he finished for him. Kakashi took a deep breath. "Yeah," he quietly admitted. I know I wasn't the best sensei and I went about it completely the wrong way in the beginning, but they're my team. Mine. And now I'm going to lose them all." Naruto reached up and lightly swatted at Kakashi's head. "Idiot." He smiled in the face of Kakashi's pout. "Just because they're going off to do different things doesn't mean you've lost them. Kids grow up, Kakashi, and just because they're leaving the nest doesn't invalidate the fact that they were there. They'll come back to you even stronger, but they will always come back. Once a genin team, always a genin team. Gamma-sensei still buys my team ramen even now." Kakashi mulled over his words as Naruto continued. "You're the one that got them to the point that they can take on these kinds of challenges. They're not going to forget that. You'll never be free of them." He nudged the man's ribs, chuckling. "How have they been?" Sasuke is being very dramatic about the fact that he has to stay in the AMBU barracks for his year's training. He found out he's not allowed to visit home until he earns his mask, and has taken to making sure we can survive without him in his own way. He grinned, shivering as a gust of wind cut through him. Kakashi drew him in, and Naruto led him, ending up between the man's legs with his back against his chest. Warmth surrounded him, and he sighed in contentment. He'd never been great with the cold. It made his arm ache, Kakashi popped his head on Naruto's shoulder. I then reminded him that I'm one of his stealth assessors, so he'll see me in 4 months. He chuckled. I think that took some of the wind out of his sails. He likes to pretend otherwise, but that boy lives for being the most. If you gave him the choice of punching an opponent or using an overly complicated, unnecessary jutsu, he'd use the jutsu every time. Kakashi finished for him. Sakura is a bit nervous about apprenticing under Tsunade, but absolutely thrilled. Kazuya has spent every minute that he's not working on his lesson plans, trying to teach her tips and tricks for studying medicine. She even made her first poison with him the other day. Kakashi just nodded silently beside him. Rio is floating on cloud 9, Naruto continued. I don't know if it's from the training trip or him asking Hinata out, though. Yeah, I heard about that, Kakashi said, amused. Kurenai was saying that Hinata is catatonic. In a good way, I assume. Naruto laughed and leaned back, gazing down at the village with fond eyes. He was so grateful for Kakashi. He'd finally told him about his illness, and while he could tell he was upset, he didn't shout or yell. Instead, he just looked at Naruto and asked what he could do. He wasn't used to people just accepting it and not being angry that he hid it. He knew if the kids ever found out, or his co-workers, he would be in for a world of anger and resentment. Kakashi didn't do that, and it just made the bond between them unbreakable in Naruto's eyes. He knew what they had wasn't exactly the norm. The closest thing Naruto could label it as his friendship, but that word didn't quite fit. There was no romantic or sexual attraction, but Naruto knew for a fact he'd never let anyone else hold him like this. Kakashi wouldn't allow this much physical contact with anyone else either. They wouldn't share this much of themselves with anyone but each other. It was deeper and more intimate than friendship, but Naruto didn't know the word for that yet. I'm going to train my Mangekyo Sharingan, Kakashi said out of nowhere. It shouldn't just be my team getting stronger while we're apart. I should be trying to be better too. Naruto was about to ask if he was sure, but stopped himself in time. It would be disrespectful to Kakashi's resolve to ask something like that. Instead, he asked, "Do you want a training partner?" Kakashi pulled away slightly and Naruto turned to look at him. He couldn't see much beyond the mask and his hate, but he knew Kakashi well enough to see the gratitude in his soft gaze. Naruto was just glad he could return the favor. "Yeah," he smiled. "You just saved me from Guy." Naruto threw his head back in laughter at the unexpected comment. "Poor Guy!" He shook his head. "All he wants is some quality training time with his esteemed rival, and you do him dirty like that. I wouldn't have to avoid him if he didn't insist on challenging me every 5 minutes." Kakashi grumbled playfully as he rested his head back onto Naruto's shoulder. "One of my worst nightmares is him finding out where I live. I'd never be free of him." Naruto grinned evilly. "I wonder what that kind of information would be worth to him." Kakashi's arms froze around him, and Naruto quickly managed to escape before Kakashi could grab him. Naruto, don't you dare!" He stuck out his tongue as he danced his way down the path back to the village. They would survive the kids leaving the nest, and they'd continue putting one foot in front of the other. It made Naruto feel a little better, knowing that they'd be doing it together. Kazuya looked up from his spot at the kitchen table as the front door opened. Naruto kicked off his sandals and ditched his Jounin vest, leaving him in a thick black jumper and black shinobi trousers. "I made tea." Kazuya nodded his head towards the stove. Naruto immediately headed in that direction, getting a mug from the cupboard and pouring himself a cup. He came back to sit opposite Kazuya, dumping his fingerless gloves on the table and wrapping both hands around the ceramic. Kazuya raised an eyebrow. "Cold? December is the worst month ever and winter is the shittiest season," Naruto huffed, taking a sip. "We live in the land of fire." "Where's the fire?" Kazuya shook his head, chuckling to himself. Naruto had always hated the winter months. He was pretty sure the Uzumaki had never gotten over their mission to the land of iron on their first C rank. Apparently, he wasn't designed for the cold. "How did it go?" he asked instead. Naruto fell quiet, and Kazuya placed down the brush, really looking at his friend. It was Sunday, so Naruto was just back from seeing Tsunade. Had something happened? Is the treatment still working? Yeah. It's still slowing it down? Naruto nodded. She wants to keep meeting weekly, and we found a good balance for my medications. Then why does it feel like you have bad news? Naruto became quiet again, and Kanzuya's heart picked up. Naruto, please tell me you're okay. I'm okay, Kaz. Naruto was quick to reassure. It's just not working as much as we'd hoped. Time seemed to freeze. What? Naruto took another sip of tea and rolled his eyes. Tsunade was never going to cure it, he said. We knew that. We were just trying to manage the symptoms, and we did that. I still have years left. Years that Ryo is going to miss. Kanzuya couldn't help but add, and Naruto slammed down his cup, spilling a bit of tea on the table. We discussed this, Naruto said firmly. We are not telling Ryo. If we told him, then he'd never go. He'd waste his time hovering over me and being angry, and that is something that he can't afford right now. It wouldn't be a waste. Kanzuya tried to say, but Naruto quickly interrupted. Is there anything Ryo can do to change it? No. Would Ryo leave with Jiraiya if he knew? No. Then you have your answer. Naruto slumped. I know this isn't fair, but we both know that this is the right decision for Ryo's future. This trip is going to impact him long after I'm gone, and I can't sacrifice his future for my present. I'll still be here when he gets back. An awkward silence fell over them as Naruto went to grab a rag to clean up the spilled tea. Kanzuya tried to find something else to say, but in his heart he knew Naruto had a point. He doubted any of the kids would leave if they found out. The only reason might be anger that Naruto had hit it in the first place. He knew Naruto had been hurt a lot deeper than he was willing to admit by Hana's reaction. It was like every nightmare and worst-case scenario had come to life for him. Kanzuya knew he couldn't use the argument that people wouldn't react badly because Hana had already proven that wrong. They'd made up after a couple months, but Kanzuya could see the wound ran deeper than that, even if Naruto and Hana couldn't. At the end of the day, it was Naruto's decision. It wasn't for Kanzuya to tell, so he would just be there for his best friend as long as he could. He would be there for both himself and the kids until there came a time they could be there themselves. How are you going to cope with having no kids in the house? He changed the subject, keeping his tone light and teasing. Naruto paused as looked over at Kanzuya carefully. He seemed to take the olive branch as he shrugged. I've still got Momo. Kanzuya couldn't help but laugh as the last of the tension melted away. Momo isn't a child, he pointed out. Don't you listen to him, Momo. Naruto walked over to the couch to rub the dog's ears as she lay flat on the cushions. You'll always be my cutest little baby. If the kids could hear your treachery, Kanzuya snorted. His laughter died down as he looked at his friend. Seriously, Naruto, you've been looking after Ryo for 13 years. You adopted Sasuke 5 years ago, and Sakura almost a year ago now. We've had another 6 genin traipsing in and out of our house for almost as long as Sasuke's been here. I believe you are the one who adopted Sakura, Naruto replied amused, but Kanzuya didn't play along. He may have been there for a huge part of the journey and had the same feelings of family and parenthood, but it was a part of Naruto's identity. Kanzuya had never seen him without a kid or not worrying about a kid. He didn't know if Naruto knew how to live without them. Naruto, you've been a parent practically since birth, and now all your kids are leaving the nest at once. You're going from 3 kids to none next week. Are you going to be okay with that? Naruto sighed as he slumped back into the chair opposite Kanzuya. I'm going to have to be, he said quietly. This is what's best for them. Don't you ever get tired of focusing on what's best for them? Kanzuya asked curiously. Don't you ever just want to, yell or hit a wall or be selfish or something? That's not what a parent does. Naruto turned his words back on him. Just because they are leaving doesn't mean they're never coming back or that they no longer have a place here. We'll always have an open door for them, and as long as they know that, then they're never really gone. Moving forward doesn't erase the past. They're just expanding their definition of home. Kanzuya sat back in his chair, processing his friend's words. Hana was right, he said, only half joking. You really do sound like one of those wise old men from the academy textbooks. Naruto rolled his eyes, but Kanzuya could see the smile tugging at the corner of his lips. They'd be okay. It would be hard, but they were strong. This is what was best for them. Ryo hugged Sasuke tightly, ignoring the Uchiha's grumbles. He let go, grinning. Good luck with ANBU. Don't do something dumb and get yourself killed before I can kick your ass again. Ryo laughed as he nodded, looking over at Sakura. He hesitated for only a brief second before he pulled her in for a hug. He and Sakura may have had their differences, but they'd come a long way since the academy. She was a part of the family now, and he would miss her. Bonding over recent deranks had done wonders for their friendship. Keep Sasuke's ego in check for me, he winked. We both know what he's like. Sakura rolled her eyes but grinned. Don't let your own head get too big. He turned to Kakashi. His godfather wasn't one for physical contact, but the man held his arms open for him anyway. Ryo launched himself into his teacher's arms. I'm going to make you proud, Kakashi, he mumbled into his Jounin vest. I'm going to take everything you've taught me and come back super strong. Kakashi's arms tightened around him for only a moment before he stepped back. Strong enough to steal a bell from me? Believe it, Ryo laughed. When I get back, we can have a fight to find out. Kakashi eyes smiled as Ryo turned to Kazune next. Ryo didn't have a chance to move before he was engulfed in Kazune's warm embrace. He clutched his eldest brother back tightly, closing his eyes as he tried to brand the feeling into his memory. Remember what I said about 3 meals a day, okay? Kazune pulled back, keeping his hands on Ryo's shoulders. Make sure to get at least 8 hours of sleep and stretch before and after training sessions, and be careful with strangers and... Kazune cut himself off, and Ryo shook his head at the tears in the man's eyes, smiling fondly. I'll be back before you know it. Kazune pulled him back in for a tight hug. You're growing up way too fast, he mumbled into Ryo's hair. I love you, kid. I love you too, Kazune. He was finally let go and he grinned, turning to the final member of his family. Nissen was just gazing at him, his blue eyes soft and shining with pride. Make sure you go to Kiri at some point, Nissen began. The Mizukage would love to meet her other cousin, and Haku is looking forward to seeing you again. You can steal a bunch of Suidan Jutsu from them. He finished off with a wink, for some reason that just made the tears start to well up in Ryo's eyes. Ryo went and pulled Inu-chan from his backpack, shoving it into Nissan's arms. I'm leaving Inu-chan in your care, he said, his voice wobbly. You have to look after him and give him back when I come home, okay? Nissen gripped the stuffed toy tightly. You got it. Ryo launched himself into Nissan's arms and tried not to sob. It was supposed to be easier than this. He'd been preparing all month and he was so excited, and he had so many great plans, but now it had come down to this. A part of Ryo didn't want to go. Of course it was Nissen that triggered the doubts. He'd managed to hold it together with everyone else, but Nissen was different. He was going to be traveling the elemental nations alone, with just Jiraiya for company. Nissen wouldn't be there. If he got stuck with something or got hurt or anything like that, Nissen wouldn't be there to help him. Nissen had always been there, as a pillar of support and acceptance. Ryo sometimes hated that about him, wanting to stand tall on his own 2 feet. But even when he rejected Nissen, he knew his brother would always be there for him. He wouldn't see Nissen for over 2 years. How much will change in that time? Hey, what's all this about? Nissen whispered as he held him close. You'll see me when you get back. It'll probably be too soon and you'll get sick of me and end up on another training trip. I'd never get sick of you, Nissen. Even I get a little sick of me sometimes. Nissen gave him one last squeeze. Ryo chuckled at his joking tone and wiped the tears off his face with his sleeve, sniffling loudly. You'll be fine, Ryo, Nissen said softly, ruffling Ryo's hair gently. You're ready for this. Ryo forced a bright smile on his face as he looked up at Nissan's kind expression. He felt the excitement begin to eclipse the nerves. Nissen believed in him. They all did. Ryo didn't know how he'd been so lucky to end up with a family like this, but he vowed he wouldn't let them down. He would come back, so strong that he could protect them all from anything that came their way. I love you, Nissan. I'm going to make you proud. Naruto shook his head, chuckling to himself. Rio, I'm already proud of you. His blue eyes glistened. I love you too. Rio finally stepped back and grabbed his bag, hauling it onto his back. He walked to stand beside Jiraiya, having already presented their papers to the guards. He looked back at his family one last time. Sasuke had his arms crossed, looking more grumpy than usual, but he was staring straight back at Rio. Sakura was giving him a small wave, a dampened smile on her face. Kakashi stood with his hands in his pockets, looking exactly like he had in the bell test almost a year ago. Kazune was openly crying as he waved, a small smile curving his lips and brightening his pink eyes. Nissan was standing firm, a proud grin in place, and he nodded at Rio as he caught his eye. Ready, Gaki? Rio turned back to look at Jiraiya, the Sannin patiently waiting for him. Rio switched his gaze so he could look at the open dirt road leading out of the village. Yeah, I'm ready. He took his first step outside the village, and then another. He kept putting one foot in front of the other, and soon Konoha disappeared in the horizon behind him. He faced forward, determination shining in his violet eyes as he walked into his future. Thank you for watching final part of What If Naruto Parents Died and Naruto becomes Shinobi to protect his brother. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Anime T23 for more exciting What If scenarios and anime content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.